Some discoveries never make it into textbooks not because they lack evidence, but because they raise questions that history isn't prepared to answer. Across continents and decades, certain excavation sites have been abruptly closed, artifacts quietly removed, and findings withheld from the public. The official explanations are often brief, vague, or missing entirely. Join us as we'll examine the digs that were shut down, the relics that disappeared, and the ruins that remain off-limits. These stories don't offer easy conclusions, but they do reveal a pattern where parts of the past are preserved and others are deliberately kept out of reach. The tomb beneath the Sphinx. Beneath the ancient sands of Giza, where the Great Sphinx has watched over the desert for more than 40 years, there's a secret that has haunted archaeologists, researchers, and conspiracy theorists for decades. It isn't carved into stone or written on papyrus. It lies buried in silence beneath one of the world's most iconic monuments. In the 1990s, a series of ground-penetrating radar scans revealed something that shook the foundations of accepted history: a perfectly rectangular chamber hidden underneath the Sphinx's paws. The shape was unmistakable man-made, deliberate, and entirely undocumented. The scans were conducted by Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West, in collaboration with a team of geophysicists. What they found wasn't just a void. It was an enclosure roughly 25 feet below the surface, right where no one expected anything to be. And that's when everything began to change. The team requested permission to excavate the site, believing they had stumbled on a sealed chamber potentially older than the Sphinx itself. But instead of support, they were met with silence and then denial. The Egyptian authorities, particularly under the leadership of Dr. Zahi Hawass, halted any further exploration. No digging was allowed, no explanation was offered, just a cold wall of refusal. For many, this decision didn't make sense. If there was nothing beneath the Sphinx, why stop anyone from checking? If the chamber was just a natural void, why not confirm it and move on? But instead of answers, the chamber was buried deeper in mystery. In 1993, NBC aired a documentary titled The Mystery of the Sphinx, which highlighted this very discovery. The program received praise, won a Daytime Emmy, and captured the public's imagination. Yet, despite the attention, the dig was never permitted. Some believe this chamber is the so-called Hall of Records, a mythical library said to hold ancient texts from Atlantis, or even older civilizations that predate Egypt itself. This idea might sound fantastical, but it's rooted in ancient legends passed down through centuries. The idea that the Sphinx predates the pharaohs is controversial, but erosion patterns on the statue's body researched by geologist Dr. Robert Schoch suggest it may have been carved as early as 10,000 BC, long before any dynastic rule. If the Sphinx is that old, then what lies beneath it could rewrite everything we know about human civilization. What makes the whole situation even more unsettling is the secrecy that surrounds it. Over the years, multiple independent researchers have tried to obtain permission to explore the area under the Sphinx. Every single request has been denied. Cameras are not allowed into the tunnel systems nearby, and Egyptian officials continue to insist there is nothing beneath the monument. Meanwhile, internal documents and off-record conversations hint that private excavations may have already occurred. According to some whispers, artifacts were removed in secret, studied in silence, and never returned to Egypt. If true, the public may never know what was found. It's also worth noting that the Sphinx sits near some of the most tightly controlled archaeological zones on Earth. Surveillance is constant. Access is limited. Tourists see only what they're allowed to see. And for decades, even mentioning the possibility of hidden chambers was enough to get researchers blacklisted from future digs. The level of control raises questions. What are they protecting? Or more precisely, what are they hiding? In 2017, the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities finally acknowledged that scanning had taken place near the Sphinx, but they quickly dismissed the results, stating the anomalies were not of archaeological interest. That vague answer only deepened suspicion. Why not at least investigate further before closing the book? Even modern scanning technologies, like muon detectors, which can map internal structures without excavation, have been ignored or blocked in this case. A chamber beneath the Sphinx may still wait in the dark, but perhaps what's even more disturbing is how determined some people are to make sure we never see it. The Lovelock Cave Skeletons. Lovelock, Nevada, is a quiet place now, just a small desert town surrounded by sun-baked hills and dry, cracked earth. But over a century ago, miners digging through bat guano in a nearby cave stumbled onto something strange, something that should have rewritten what we know about early life in North America. Instead, it disappeared. In 1911, two guano miners, James Hart and David Pugh, entered what would become known as Lovelock Cave. They weren't searching for history. They were after fertilizer. But as they scraped deeper into the dark layers of accumulated waste, they began pulling up items that clearly didn't belong to the modern world. Baskets, sandals, fishing tools, some remarkably well preserved, started turning up by the dozens. Word spread, and soon the University of California sent researchers to investigate. It should have been a breakthrough. But it wasn't the tools or the handmade duck decoys that sparked whispers across Nevada. It was the bones. According to locals and early reports, some of the human remains pulled from the cave were shockingly large, far taller than the average human height, with skulls that some claimed didn't resemble any population known to live in the region. Several people described reddish hair clinging to the skulls. The discovery echoed an old story that the local Paiute people had passed down for generations. The legend tells of the Titicaca, a tribe of violent, red-haired giants who had once roamed the region, fighting with the Paiute and even practicing cannibalism. The stories say that eventually the Paiute drove them into a cave and set it on fire. That final detail has led many to wonder whether Lovelock Cave was the site of that battle, and if so, whether what the miners found wasn't just old bones, but evidence of a race that shouldn't exist. At first, some of the large bones were reportedly taken to local museums. A few skulls were even displayed for a time at the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca. Visitors who saw them described their size as disproportionate larger than normal, with unusually wide jaws and eye sockets. But, over time, those remains disappeared from public view. Requests to study them were denied or ignored. Photographs remain, but the physical evidence is gone. No official institution has ever confirmed the existence of giant skeletons in Lovelock Cave. In fact, many of the excavation reports avoid mentioning human remains altogether. The focus shifted to the cave's artifacts, which are undeniably impressive, but far less controversial. Critics say the giant claims are nothing more than tall tales, exaggerated by miners and misunderstood by locals. But the sudden silence, the missing bones, and the change in focus raise troubling questions. The Smithsonian Institution is often brought into the conversation. Multiple researchers and authors have claimed that the remains were sent there and quietly vanished. While the Smithsonian denies any such involvement, similar stories have surfaced across the country. Time and again, discoveries that don't fit into the standard timeline are said to have been confiscated, discredited, or erased. What happened inside Lovelock Cave might never be fully known. The cave itself is now protected, and no further excavations are allowed. Visitors can stand inside it, walk along its cool stone walls, and read official signs about the ancient artifacts found there. But nowhere on those signs will they find mention of the red-haired giants. That part of the story has been removed from the record. Even so, the memory of what was found lingers in faded newspaper articles, in tribal legend, and in the stories of those who claim to have seen the bones before they vanished. Maybe the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Maybe the remains were ordinary, and the excitement simply grew beyond the facts. Or maybe something truly unusual was uncovered, someone decided the world wasn't ready to see. If that's the case, then Lovelock Cave isn't just an archaeological site. It's a grave not only for the dead, but for a version of history that was quietly sealed away. Researchers still search for answers, not with shovels, but through dusty archives, restricted museum files, and the overlooked details buried in old reports. Now and then, a photo surfaces, or a forgotten testimony breathes life back into the mystery. But without access to the bones, and without permission to question the official story, all that remains is a growing unease that something was indeed found in Lovelock Cave, and someone made sure the rest of us would never know. The Bucegi mountain tunnels. In the summer of 2003, a routine satellite scan over Romania's Bucegi Mountains caught the attention of military analysts, not because of what they saw above ground, but because of what they found hidden beneath it. Deep inside the mountain range, strange voids appeared on radar, symmetrical shapes, sharp angles, and hollowed-out chambers that didn't match any natural geological formations. At first, it looked like some kind of technical error, but further scans revealed something even more bizarre. A tunnel system stretching miles beneath the rock, ending in a massive dome-like structure buried inside the mountain. That's when everything went quiet. Officially, there's little mention of what happened next, but according to whistleblower accounts and leaked documents, what followed wasn't an academic investigation, it was a military lockdown. The Romanian government, allegedly under international pressure, sealed off the mountain and restricted access to the site. One of the key figures named in these accounts is a military official turned researcher named General Emil Stranu, who later spoke about high-level orders, sudden diplomatic pressure, and strange cooperation between Romanian intelligence and foreign agencies, including the United States. What's claimed to have been found inside the mountain has been described as nothing short of impossible. A series of carved tunnels, perfectly smooth and aligned, led to a vast underground chamber. The walls of the chamber emitted a subtle bluish glow, not from lights, but from the material itself, something unknown, something not found anywhere else on Earth. Inside the chamber, massive stone tables were arranged in a pattern that resembled a control room. On each table, holographic projections were said to appear when approached, showing scenes of stars, DNA sequences, and events from Earth's past. There were no inscriptions, no human markings, only precision, symmetry, and silence. It didn't look like anything ever built by any known civilization, and that may be why access was shut down so quickly. Allegedly, the Romanian government was prepared to announce the find to the world, but before they could, an emergency meeting was held with US officials. According to sources, representatives from NATO intervened, warning of the global consequences if details of the discovery were made public. Not long after, the Romanian press blacked out all information related to the site. The mountain was closed off, the story faded. For most, it sounds too far-fetched to be real. Stories of ancient alien structures hidden inside mountains belong in science fiction. But here's what makes this story difficult to dismiss. Documents leaked online in 2009 appear to match known military formatting. Names, positions, and language used in these files suggest real people were involved, real agencies with the power to enforce silence. And while none of it has been officially confirmed, none of it has been openly debunked either. The truly disturbing part is how steadily the suppression has continued. No independent researchers have been allowed near the mountain's key zones since the alleged discovery. Attempts to investigate are met with legal threats or sudden visa denials. Journalists who've tried to reach the area often report being followed, questioned, or turned away without explanation. And though Romania is rich with ancient legend stories of strange beings, hollow mountains, and forbidden knowledge, the Bucegi tunnels are never discussed in official narratives or textbooks. Then there's the technology. According to some reports, one of the tunnels extended beneath the Earth's crust, reaching a secondary chamber in the Gobi Desert. Another was said to lead below the pyramids of Egypt. These claims strain the imagination, yet they're repeated again and again in documents attributed to those who were allegedly involved. If there's even a shred of truth to it, the Bucegi discovery could challenge the entire structure of human history, and that, more than anything else, might explain why it's been buried. From the outside, the Bucegi Mountains are still open to hikers and tourists. The forest is calm. The peaks draw photographers and climbers year-round. But beneath that quiet surface, something may lie hidden, walled off, not by nature, but by decision. The kind of decision made behind closed doors, in meetings without minutes, by people who answer to no one. If the tunnels are real, and if what was found inside them was truly beyond human understanding, then we may be looking at one of the most significant cover-ups of the modern age. And maybe that's why the silence is so complete. Not because there's nothing there, but because what's there would change everything. The Grand Canyon's Lost Egyptian Cave. In April of 1909, the Arizona Gazette published a headline that would quietly ripple through the world of archaeology before vanishing without a trace. The article told the story of an expedition funded by the Smithsonian Institution and led by a man named G.E. Kincaid. He claimed to have discovered a cave deep within the Grand Canyon, filled with artifacts that bore no resemblance to anything Native American. Instead, what he described sounded unmistakably Egyptian. Mummified bodies, hieroglyphs, copper tools, and even statues resembling the gods of the Nile. The cave, according to the article, was enormous, with branching tunnels, ritual chambers, and a shrine at the far end that suggested some kind of religious purpose. And then, silence. The story was never followed up. The Smithsonian issued no press release. In fact, when contacted years later, representatives from the institution denied that G.E. Kincaid had ever existed or worked for them. No official records were produced, no excavation logs were released, and no evidence of any such cave was ever made public. For a discovery that could have changed history, the sudden disappearance of all related information raised more questions than answers. The Grand Canyon is massive, so vast and rugged that even now, over a century later, parts of it remain inaccessible. But what's strange about this particular site is how specific the original report was. Kincaid was said to have entered the cave from the Colorado River, climbing up a steep rock wall before finding a narrow entrance. Inside, He described passageways large enough to accommodate dozens of people, with ventilation shafts carved into the walls and rooms filled with artifacts made of stone, gold, and copper. The layout seemed deliberate, as if built by a highly advanced and organized culture. If the story were a simple hoax, it would be easy to dismiss. But the article wasn't published in a fringe newsletter it ran in a major newspaper. And it included direct references to the Smithsonian's involvement, even quoting Kincaid as saying the institution had taken charge of the site. Why would a newspaper risk its reputation by printing something so specific if there was nothing to it? Researchers who tried to follow the story quickly ran into walls. The cave, allegedly located in an area now labelled as off-limits, falls within one of the most restricted zones of the Grand Canyon. Several of the surrounding landmarks bear strangely Egyptian names: Tower of Ra, Horus Temple, Osiris Temple, which has only fueled speculation. Officials say the names are coincidental, chosen by early explorers with an interest in mythology, but the coincidences pile up. To this day, no maps show the supposed location of the cave. Attempts to get access are consistently denied. Helicopters are restricted from flying low over certain parts of the canyon, and no known expeditions have ever reached the site Kincaid described. When independent researchers filed Freedom of Information Act requests to see any correspondence between the Smithsonian and the Arizona Gazette, they were told no such records exist. The institution insists that no Egyptian artifacts have ever been found in North America, and that the entire story was likely fiction. But the story refuses to die. Over the decades, new witnesses have come forward: former park rangers, amateur explorers, even retired pilots, claiming to have seen unusual formations, sealed entrances, or armed personnel guarding remote areas of the canyon. Some say they were told to leave when they got too close. Others describe unnatural geometric shapes carved into cliff walls, resembling the entrances to tombs or temples. The mystery remains frozen in time. No confirmed photographs, no verified site, no public proof. Just a single article from 1909, a string of denials, and a canyon filled with secrets. Whether the cave ever existed, or whether it was wiped from the record by choice, we may never know. But one thing is certain: if the story were true, it would raise impossible questions. How did a culture from the other side of the world arrive in ancient North America? Who built the cave? And why has every trace of it been erased? Maybe the cave is still there, hidden behind rockfalls or buried by time. Or maybe it's been sealed off not by nature, but by people who decided the world wasn't ready to know what was found inside. The hidden room in Tutankhamun's tomb. The tomb of Tutankhamun has always held a special place in the world of archaeology. When Howard Carter first uncovered it in 1922, the world was stunned by its wealth, its beauty, and its near-perfect preservation. Unlike so many royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, this one had escaped looters for over 3,000 years. But nearly a century later, in 2015, new technology raised the possibility that Carter might have missed something: a sealed room hidden behind one of the tomb's walls that had remained undisturbed for millennia. It began with high-resolution scans of the tomb's walls. British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves noticed faint lines and patterns beneath the painted surfaces. To the naked eye, they looked like part of the artwork. But under closer examination, those lines appeared to be architectural. They hinted at a doorway one that had been plastered over and painted to match the surrounding chamber. If true, that meant there could be more to Tutankhamun's tomb than anyone had realized. Reeves believed the hidden space might even be the lost burial chamber of Queen Nefertiti. The theory caused a wave of excitement across the archaeological community. Thermal imaging followed, revealing temperature differences in the wall, another clue suggesting the presence of a hollow space behind it. Then came ground-penetrating radar scans conducted by Japanese specialist Hirokatsu Watanabe. The results were shocking. According to the scans, there were not just one, but possibly two voids behind the walls, and at least one of them appeared to contain metallic objects. In the quiet corridors of Egypt's Antiquities Ministry, the implications of these findings could not be ignored. If the scans were accurate, they were looking at one of the most significant discoveries in a generation. And yet, instead of moving forward with care and precision, the project began to stall. Doubt was cast on the scans. Disagreements erupted between experts. The Egyptian authorities grew quiet. Eventually, permission to excavate the wall was denied. The reason? Officials claimed the evidence wasn't conclusive enough to justify damaging the artwork. But for many watching from the outside, the sudden halt didn't feel like caution, it felt like fear. The walls in question were just thin layers of plaster over solid rock. If a chamber did exist, cutting through would not have destroyed the tomb, only modified it. But the response from Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities was final. The scans were dismissed. Nicholas Reeves was sidelined. Further testing was suspended indefinitely. To this day, no one has been allowed to look behind the wall. That decision puzzled researchers around the world. The tomb of Tutankhamun is one of the most visited and studied archaeological sites on Earth. Every inch has been documented and analysed. And yet, when presented with compelling evidence of an unexplored room potentially holding the remains of one of Egypt's most mysterious queens, authorities chose to walk away. Some individuals think that the truth behind the wall could upend the official version of Egypt's 18th dynasty. If Nefertiti had been buried there first, and Tutankhamun's burial was a later addition, it would challenge the story Egypt has told about its most famous boy king. Others suspect more controversial motives, that something else lies behind the wall, something not meant to be found. Whispers of hidden chambers in ancient tombs aren't new, but in this case, the science supported the rumours. Multiple scans from multiple teams all pointed to the same possibility. Still, the site remains untouched. And now, nearly a decade after the initial radar results were made public, no further investigation has taken place. It's as if the momentum simply disappeared. Visitors still file through the painted halls of Tutankhamun's tomb every day, snapping photos of the golden mask and ornate carvings. They admire the splendour, unaware that just a few inches away, a sealed space may hold secrets the world has never seen. All that separates us from it is a single painted wall, thin, fragile, and curiously off-limits. Maybe the room behind it is empty, or it holds only rock and silence. Or maybe it contains something that challenges the stories carved in stone for centuries. Whatever the truth is, someone has chosen not to look, and that decision may be the most mysterious thing of all. Gobekli Tepe's unexcavated sections. In the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, just outside the city of Şanlıurfa, there lies a place that changed everything we thought we knew about ancient civilization. Gobekli Tepe. At first glance, it looks like a shallow, sunken quarry series of low circular enclosures carved into the earth, surrounded by scattered stone slabs. But what lies beneath is far older, far stranger, and far more unsettling than anyone could have imagined. When archaeologists first began digging there in the 1990s, they weren't expecting much. Then they uncovered the standing pillars, massive T-shaped monoliths, arranged in complex circles, some weighing up to 20 tons and rising over 16 feet tall, and carved into them were animals. Snakes, scorpions, boars, vultures etched with impossible precision and with a sense of symbolism no one could fully explain. What made it even more shocking was the age. Radiocarbon dating placed Gobekli Tepe at around 9,600 BC UVA 11,0 years ago. That's 6,0 years older than Stonehenge and 7,0 years before the pyramids of Egypt. It predates agriculture, pottery, and writing. According to everything historians had believed, humans weren't even supposed to be building monumental structures at that time. We were still meant to be hunter-gatherers, nomads. And yet, someone had not only built Gobekli Tepe, had engineered it with skill, purpose, and meaning. But the most disturbing part of Gobekli Tepe isn't what's been found, it's what hasn't. Only about 5% of the site has been fully excavated. That's right, 5%. The rest remains buried beneath layers of soil, protected by officials who now insist that digging further would damage the site. Archaeologists have been ordered to stop. They say it's for preservation. But there are questions no one seems willing to answer. Why halt exploration at one of the most important sites in human history? Why seal off the remaining 95% when it could hold clues to our origins or rewrite the story of civilization itself? Radar scans of the buried sections show that what's already been uncovered is just the surface of a much larger complex. Dozens, possibly hundreds soft stone circles still lie beneath the earth. There may be chambers, passageways, or even older layers built on top of one another, like geological time capsules. Some experts believe the deeper you go, the older the structures get. And if that's true, then we haven't just stumbled onto an ancient temple, we've found a timeline, buried on purpose, maybe by the people who built it. What's strange is that the site doesn't seem to have been abandoned. It was intentionally buried. Around 8,000 BCE, centuries after its construction, someone carefully filled in the enclosures with dirt, rocks, and debris. Not smashed, not destroyed, buried. As if they wanted to hide it, not from nature, but from future generations. And that decision may be the key to the mystery. Why hide something so monumental, so advanced? What was Gobekli Tepe used for, and why did its builders choose to bury it alive? Some have speculated that the carvings on the pillars tell a story, not just of animals, but of a cosmic event. One enclosure features a vulture holding a circular object, next to symbols that some researchers claim resemble constellations. Others suggest the site was part of a forgotten religion, one that reached far across continents before vanishing without a trace. Still, others believe the builders may not have been human in the way we understand it, at least not shaped by the same history, the same path. And yet, with all of these questions swirling, the work has stopped. Official tour guides take visitors through the small section that's been unearthed, past wooden walkways and neat signs that highlight the carvings. But they don't take people to the sealed areas. They don't mention the radar scans or the buried circles still hidden beneath the hillside. They certainly don't explain why one of humanity's greatest archaeological sites is being left untouched, locked under dirt and silence. In a world hungry for answers about our past, Gobekli Tepe should be the focus of relentless excavation, constant discovery, but instead it sits quietly, watched, protected, and off limits. As if someone, somewhere, has decided we're not ready to see what else is buried there. Or worse maybe, we were never supposed to see it in the first place. The Vatican's stolen Egyptian artifacts. Deep within the heart of Vatican City, beyond the Sistine Chapel's ceiling, and the guarded halls of the Apostolic Palace lies a collection few will ever see. The Vatican museums are home to one of the world's most extensive private archivestons of thousands of artifacts, scrolls, and objects tucked behind sealed doors guarded by centuries of silence. But among the marble statues and gilded crosses, there are whispers of something that doesn't quite fit. Objects from a land far older than Christianity itself. Artifacts from ancient Egypt, removed from their homeland, hidden from scholars, and never acknowledged in full. The connection between the Vatican and Egypt stretches back further than most realize. During the Roman Empire's conquest of Egypt, temples were raided and sacred objects taken as trophies. As Christianity spread and the old pagan religions were stamped out, many of those relics vanished into private ransom, destroyed, others repurposed, and a select few absorbed into the growing power of the Church. Over the centuries, rumours began to circulate that the Vatican had not only preserved some of these relics, but actively collected them quietly, systematically, and without explanation. One of the more troubling threads leads back to Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798. While his military campaign failed, the French expedition unearthed countless artifacts and opened the door for Europe's obsession with Egyptian antiquity. Museums in London and Paris began to fill with mummies and sarcophagi, but according to private letters and shipping records that surfaced decades later, some crates of artifacts were never listed in public inventories. They were quietly rerouted, not to France, but to Rome. No one knows exactly what they contained. The records list them only as items of religious significance. In 1999, a former Vatican archivist anonymously published notes claiming that a secret wing of the Vatican Library contained Egyptian scrolls that predate the Book of Genesis scrolls, that describe creation in ways that conflict with biblical doctrine. The notes described illustrations of figures not found in Christian tradition, and references to star beings descending from the sky to teach early man the secrets of language and law. These claims were dismissed by church officials as fabrications, but the archivist's details were strangely specific, describing the scrolls' physical condition, the language they were written in, and even the layout of the chamber in which they were kept. What adds to the suspicion is the Vatican's long history of withholding ancient texts from public view. The Vatican Apostolic Archivonce, known as the Secret Archive, spans over 50 miles of shelving. Only a tiny fraction of its contents are accessible, and only to a limited number of vetted scholars. Researchers who've requested access to pre-Christian materials often find their applications denied without explanation. And while the Church officially acknowledges owning several Egyptian papyri, only a handful have ever been published or studied. Perhaps the most controversial allegation is that the Vatican possesses entire mummies, preserved in perfect condition, stored in climate-controlled chambers deep below the city. These claims, though unconfirmed, have been repeated by former insiders and whispered about by researchers for decades. One story tells of a sarcophagus inscribed not with hieroglyphs, but with strange symbols unknown to any known language's symbols, also found on certain mosaics in early Roman churches. If true, this would suggest a far more complex connection between ancient Egypt and the early church than anyone has dared admit. Why hide these artifacts? Theories range from the mundane to the extreme. Certain people claim that the relics contain historical truths that contradict scripture, accounts of humanity's origins that challenge the church's teachings. Others say the artifacts aren't just religious, they're technological. Devices mistaken for ceremonial objects, tools that operated on principles modern science still can't explain. And then some believe the real secret isn't in what the artifacts are, but in who brought them to Earth in the first place. The Vatican remains silent. Its museums offer glimpses fragments of Egyptian statuary, obelisks re-erected in courtyards, but never the full picture. What lies beneath, in the locked chambers and underground vaults, is left to speculation. And that silence, more than anything else, is what fuels the mystery. Because if the Church is protecting something powerful, ancient, and inconvenient, then the world may never know the true extent of what was taken or why it was hidden. The sealed tunnels beneath Teotihuacan. Beneath the sprawling ruins of Teotihuacan, the ancient city that once stood as the beating heart of pre-Aztec Mesoamerica, there are tunnels long, winding, and unnervingly sealed. Above ground, tourists walk the Avenue of the Dead, climb the towering Pyramid of the Sun, and marvel at structures that have stood for over 500 years. But below that same earth, past the thresholds of crumbled temples and forgotten passageways, something remains buried. Something no one can fully explain, and very few have been allowed to see. The first major hint came in 2003, when heavy rains caused the ground near the Temple of the Feathered Serpent to collapse. What opened up was a previously unknown vertical shaft, hidden just beneath the surface. Archaeologists sent down remote equipment and were stunned to discover a tunnel stretching over 300 feet beneath the temple. It was perfectly aligned, carefully constructed, and entirely man-made. What they found inside defied expectations. Liquid mercury pooled in channels, thousands of strange metallic spheres coated in a material resembling pyrite, and walls laced with magnetized minerals. These weren't just ceremonial relics. The tunnel itself seemed engineered with intent. It sloped downward at a steady angle, lined with chambers and doorways, each one deliberately sealed. Some researchers speculated it could be a symbolic underworlder sacred path, mimicking the journey to the afterlife. But others weren't convinced. The objects inside didn't fit neatly into myth. The mercury, toxic and volatile, wasn't used in ritual by any known Mesoamerican culture. The spheres, smooth and metallic, had no known function. The deeper the archaeologists went, the more the site began to feel like something not just hidden, but protected. In 2015, after years of digging with robotic probes and careful excavation, the team reached the end of the tunnel. Behind a final sealed wall, they discovered 3 chambers completely untouched for over 1,000 years. Within them were statues, carved masks, jade objects, and organic materials that had somehow survived the passage of time. But instead of sharing the full inventory of what was found, authorities released only a handful of carefully chosen photographs. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the excavation stopped. The reason given was preservation. The site was fragile, they said. The artifacts needed time to be studied. But the tunnel was resealed, the entrance covered, and no further excavations have been conducted since. Independent researchers have been denied access, and the public has been given no clear timeline on when or if the project will continue. Questions about what else might lie beneath Teotihuacan, especially beneath the much larger pyramid of the sun, have gone unanswered. Many think the tunnel was just the start. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have shown anomalies beneath other parts of the site: cavities, chambers, and what appear to be additional tunnels branching out beneath the city like veins. If these are real, they could stretch for miles. But any talk of new digs is quickly shut down. The Mexican government has declared large portions of the site off-limits. The official stance is caution, but silence has a way of breeding suspicion. Why build such elaborate tunnels only to seal them off? Why bury liquid mercury and magnetic stones in a place believed to be sacred? Some think the people of Teotihuacan were hiding something, perhaps knowledge, perhaps something more tangible. Others suggest the tunnels were never meant for the dead at all. They may have been part of a system far more advanced than anything we've given ancient cultures credit for. Energy, storage, transportation, words that seem out of place in history books, but fit all too easily with what's been left behind. Teotihuacan's builders remain a mystery. By the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, the city was already abandoned, its original name lost to time. The Aztecs called it the City of the Gods and believed the gods themselves had built it. They spoke of knowledge that had been buried on purpose, sealed beneath stone so that future generations couldn't misuse it. Now, more than a decade after the tunnel was discovered, there are still more questions than answers. What else lies beneath the city? Why won't they dig further? And most importantly, who sealed the tunnels, and what were they trying to protect us from? The suppressed secrets of Mohenjo-Daro. In the parched plains of present-day Pakistan lie the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, once a thriving metropolis of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. Built more than 500 years ago, it was one of the world's earliest urban centers, complete with multi-storied homes, intricate drainage systems, public baths, and straight, grid-like streets. To modern archaeologists, the city should have been primitive. Instead, what they found suggested something far more advanced, something that didn't quite fit the expected narrative of slow, linear human progress. But as more was uncovered, a strange pattern emerged. The deeper the questions went, the faster the answers disappeared. Excavations began in the 1920s under British rule, led by archaeologists like R.D. Banerjee and Sir John Marshall. What they found defied expectations. Mohenjo-Daro showed evidence of civil engineering, comparable in planning to modern cities' advanced waterworks, standardized bricks, and even toilets in individual homes. There were no grand temples, no signs of monarchy or standing armies, yet the city seemed to function with near-perfect organization. It had all the marks of a complex society, minus the signs of power or violence that typically define ancient empires. And then came the most puzzling discovery of all. The city was suddenly abandoned. No one knows exactly why. There are no signs of a major war, no evidence of an earthquake or natural disaster that could explain the sudden end. The skeletons that were found lay scattered in the streets, clutching each other, their bodies strangely preserved. Some of them appeared to have died instantly, as if frozen in place by a force no one could explain. Radiation levels in certain areas were reportedly higher than normal. This led to theories too strange for most academic journals, but too persistent to ignore ideas of ancient warfare, or even something resembling a nuclear event. One of the most controversial claims came from a series of reports in the 1970s which suggested that traces of vitrified stone rock melted into glass by extreme heat had been found in parts of the city. Similar effects have only been observed at nuclear test sites. Indian researcher David Davenport later wrote that he found evidence of what he called a blast zone, where buildings had crumbled outward, not inward, and where intense heat appeared to have struck certain areas without leaving behind fire damage. His work was dismissed by mainstream scholars, yet none could fully explain the sudden collapse of a city so well structured, so ahead of its time. Adding to the mystery, much of Mohenjo-Daro remains unexcavated. only a small fraction of the city has been studied, and efforts to dig deeper have been repeatedly halted. Pakistani authorities cite preservation concerns, saying the site is too fragile for continued exploration. But critics argue that the lack of transparency raises more questions than it answers. Artifacts recovered from the site have gone missing. Entire rooms of finding spottery, tools, and even written tablet shave vanished into archives, never to be seen again. The writing system of the Indus Valley, found etched into seals and tablets at Mohenjo-Daro, has never been decoded. Dozens of attempts have been made, but the script remains silent. Without a Rosetta Stone, its meaning is locked away. Some linguists suspect it holds more than trade records, or names it might preserve knowledge, rituals, or even warnings from the people who lived there. But until it's cracked, no one can be sure. There's also the issue of geography. Mohenjo-Daro was built on a floodplain, which makes its survival for centuries all the more remarkable. Ancient civilizations typically avoided such locations, yet this one thrived there, protected perhaps by engineering techniques we've yet to rediscover. Some of the site's water systems are still functional, baffling modern hydrologists. It's as if whoever built the city knew something we don't, something about nature, construction, or time itself. Today, Mohenjo-Daro is considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site, yet it crumbles slowly under heat and neglect. Tourism is limited, funding is inconsistent, and many of its discoveries are locked away in archives that few are allowed to access. The surface of the city, its streets, its wells, its eerily intact homes remains visible. But the deeper truths, whatever they may be, seem to be buried under something far heavier than earth: silence, denial, and a refusal to ask the wrong questions. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, that one of the oldest cities on earth may have vanished not just from history, but from memory on purpose. The Rockwall of Texas. Just beneath the soil of Rockwall, Texas, there's something hidden that shouldn't be there. It looks like a wallong, buried and made of stone blocks so precisely arranged that they almost seem intentional. Locals have known about it since the mid-1800s, when settlers digging for water hit something solid. As they kept digging, they uncovered layer after layer of massive stones stacked in straight lines, forming what appeared to be a wall stretching for hundreds of feet underground. The discovery was strange, but the conclusion seemed simple enough. It must be a natural formation. At least, that's what people were told to believe. But not everyone agreed. Over the years, people began to notice that the stones weren't just randomly placed. They were cut some into perfect rectangles, others with sharp 90-degree angles. In certain places, the stones even showed signs of mortar or fitted joints, the kind you might expect in ancient architecture. The more that was uncovered, the harder it became to explain away as a natural rock formation. Farmers, curious locals, and amateur geologists kept finding the same thing: wall-like structures buried deep underground, forming corners, tunnels, and archways. But just when interest would start to build, something strange always seemed to happen. The site would be sealed, the hole filled in, the investigation stopped. Mainstream geologists argue that the rock wall structure is a natural phenomenon called a sandstone dike. According to this theory, the formation was created millions of years ago when sediment pushed up through cracks in the earth and hardened into long, wall-like shapes. And yet, this doesn't quite explain the patterns, the symmetry, or the sheer scale of what's down there. In 1976, geologist James Shelton examined a section of the wall and described it as too organized to be entirely natural. He pointed out sharp edges and repeating patterns that looked more like masonry than geology. Still, his findings were never widely published, and funding for further study quietly dried up. Photographs taken over the decades show massive stones, some as long as 10 feet, laid out in straight lines and right angles. Some stones appear to have inscriptions, though weathered and unclear. There are even accounts of metallic objects being found embedded between the stone subjects that disappeared before they could be properly analysed. Most of the evidence comes from privately owned land, and with no official excavation taking place, it's nearly impossible to verify what's true and what's been exaggerated. But one thing is clear. Every time someone gets too close, the wall goes back underground. In the 1990s, a group of researchers tried to bring attention back to the site. They dug carefully, documented everything, and published detailed reports suggesting that the structure might date back tens of thousands of years, far older than any known civilization in North America. The reaction from the academic community was silence. No rebuttals, no investigations, just a quiet dismissal. Critics said the work wasn't peer-reviewed, the methods were flawed, or the researchers were biased, but no one came forward to dig deeper. To some, the wall marks the remains of an ancient civilization known that vanished in a great cataclysm and was buried for millennia. Others think it may be connected to global legends of sunken or lost cities, the same way people talk about ruins in the Amazon or strange underwater formations off the coast of Japan. Whatever the truth, the rock wall doesn't fit neatly into any accepted history, and maybe that's why it keeps getting buried. The town itself has embraced the mystery, at least on the surface. There are murals, signs, and tourist brochures that mention the wall. But when you ask to see it, most locals will tell you there's nothing to find. Some of the entrances have been paved over. Others sit quietly behind locked gates and private fences. And every few years, someone tries to raise funds for a new excavation. It never gets very far. The wall still runs beneath the ground, silent and unmoving. Whether it was built by hand or shaped by time, no one seems willing to find out for sure. Not officially. Not with the kind of transparency a mystery like this deserves. And maybe that's the point. If the rock wall is natural, then the truth should be easy to prove. But if it isn't, if it was built by someone long before recorded history, then everything we thought we knew about ancient America would have to change. And so the wall remains buried, out of sight, out of mind, just close enough to touch, but always just beyond reach. The sealed shaft in the Great Pyramid. For centuries, the Great Pyramid of Giza has loomed over the desert like a frozen riddle immense, silent and unsolved. Most believe it's been fully explored, mapped and understood. But deep inside the pyramid, past the narrow corridors and grand chambers shown in every textbook, there's a place few have seen. A shaft, no wider than a shoebox, rises from the Queen's chamber and stretches upward through solid stone. For years, it was believed to be nothing more than a ventilation tunnel. Then, in 1993, a tiny robot was sent inside. What it found at the end of that dark passage would raise more questions than answers and lead to a cover-up that still hasn't been fully explained. The robot, named Upuot 2, was designed by German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink. It crept slowly through the shaft, sending back video footage as it went. For nearly 200 feet, it crawled upward at a steep incline, navigating a space so tight that no human could follow. At the end, it reached something no one expected. A small limestone door with 2 copper handles embedded in it. perfectly symmetrical, polished, and unlike anything else in the pyramid. The door was sealed. No one knew what lay behind it. And for nearly a decade, no one was allowed to find out. Gantenbrink was eager to return, to push further, to discover what the sealed shaft was hiding. But before he could, he was suddenly cut off. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority halted all plans for follow-up exploration. Gantenbrink was dismissed. The official reason? Safety concerns and bureaucratic delays. But many researchers believe he was removed because he wasn't part of the right academic circles. After all, he asked the wrong questions and wanted to go further than he was supposed to. It wasn't until 2002 that another robot was finally allowed back into the shaft. This time, it was operated by National Geographic and a team sanctioned by Egyptian officials. The world watched live as the new robot drilled a small hole through the limestone door, inserting a fiber optic camera through the opening. What it saw was baffling. Another stone surface, only a few inches beyond the first, flat, featureless, and equally sealed. It was as if the passage had been blocked on purpose, twice, by someone who wanted to ensure no one ever reached the end. Since then, access to the shaft has remained tightly controlled. A second shaft this time, on the opposite side of the chamber, was also explored and found to contain a similar stone door, also sealed, also inaccessible. But what lies beyond either of them remains unknown. The Egyptian government has promised transparency, but over the years, public updates have grown infrequent, vague, or altogether absent. Researchers who ask to review footage or data from the robots are often denied. Independent exploration is strictly prohibited. The shafts have become a mystery within a mystery, acknowledged yet untouchable. Why would the builders of the Great Pyramid construct such precise, narrow shafts, only to seal them off? What purpose could they serve? Some have speculated that the shafts were spiritually aimed at specific stars, forming a celestial connection between the pharaoh's soul and the afterlife. Others believe they were symbolic passageways, never meant to be physically traversed, but a growing number of voices point to something far stranger. They suggest the sealed shaft may lead to a hidden chamberone, never documented, never entered, holding something the ancient builders wanted to protect, or perhaps conceal. There's a theory that the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tombit, was a machine, a structure built with knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and energy that we still don't fully understand. If that's true, then the sealed shafts may not be random at all. They may be part of a larger mechanism, one we've only barely begun to recognize. But rather than explore that idea, authorities have chosen to seal the site back up, keep the data close, and leave the deeper questions unanswered. Today, tourists wander through the pyramid's corridors, past the king's chamber and the echoing Grand Gallery. Guides repeat familiar stories about burial chambers and stolen treasures, but the shafts remain off-limits quiet, narrow scars in the stone that point to something more. They're not myths or rumours. They're real. They've been filmed. They're sealed. And whatever lies behind those ancient doors, someone decided long ago that we're not supposed to know. The sunken ruins of Lake Titicaca. High in the Andes, where the air is thin and the sky feels closer than the ground, Lake Titicaca stretches across the border of Peru and Bolivia like a mirror for the clouds. It's the highest navigable lake in the world, steeped in legend, revered by the Inca, and surrounded by ruins that hint at a civilization long gone. But what lies beneath its shimmering surface has remained one of the least understood and most carefully avoided archaeological mysteries in the Americas. Because at the bottom of this vast sacred lake, there are ruins. And not just scattered stones or pottery fragments. Entire structures, roads, temples. A city, sunken and silent, with no clear explanation for how or why it ended up there. Stories of submerged buildings beneath Lake Titicaca aren't new. Local fishermen and indigenous communities have passed them down for generations. They speak of stone walls glimpsed through the water on calm days, and strange shapes felt underfoot when casting nets near the shallows. For centuries, the stories were dismissed as folklore. But in the year 2000, that changed. That's when a team of international researchers, led by the scientific and archaeological departments of Bolivia, conducted a sonar survey of the lake's floor. What they discovered was astonishing. A massive complex beneath the southern part of the lake, just off the coast near the village of Santiago de Ojulaya. Using underwater scanning and dive teams, they confirmed the existence of stone terraces, long roads, and large walls, some of them extending over 1 kilometer in length. Most startling was a temple-like structure nearly 200 meters wide, resting beneath layers of sediment and freshwater plants. Carbon dating from organic material taken from the site suggested it was over 10 years old, older than the Inca Empire. And yet, the architecture mirrored the style of Tiwanaku, a pre-Incan civilization known for building the mysterious Gateway of the Sun and crafting megalithic blocks with precision cuts that defy modern tools. If this underwater complex was indeed Tiwanaku in origin, then it implied something extraordinary, that the Tiwanaku people built structures on land that was later swallowed by the lake. But Lake Titicaca isn't fed by the ocean. It doesn't rise and fall with tides. For an entire city or religious site to be submerged, either a massive tectonic shift would have had to occur, or the lake itself once held different boundaries than it does now. Some researchers proposed that climate shifts, glacial melt, or ancient earthquakes might have changed the water levels over time. But even those theories leave gaps. The level of preservation seen in the ruins suggests they were suddenly and permanently submerged. And here's where the story takes a turn. After the initial announcement in 2000, there was talk of international collaborations, funding for excavation, and plans to construct underwater observation platforms, but none of it happened. Instead, the project was abruptly scaled back, updates stopped, requests for new dives were quietly denied. To this day, the full details of what was found remain unpublished. Bolivia has since designated the area as a protected cultural site, meaning that even scientific exploration now requires government approval. Approval that, for reasons never made public, is rarely granted. The silence surrounding the ruins has only deepened the mystery. Some believe the submerged city challenges accepted timelines of Andean civilization, that it pushes the rise of complex society in South America further back than scholars are ready to admit. Others point to legends from both the Tiwanaku and Inca that speak of a great flood, one that swallowed cities whole and left only whispers behind. If these stories are more than metaphor, then what lies at the bottom of Lake Titicaca may be a literal remnant of a world lost to water. Adding to the mystery is the fact that no major museum has requested to display artifacts from the site. No documentaries have explored it in detail. No follow-up dives have been widely publicized. It's as if a curtain was drawn the moment something too inconvenient was found. Even today, the lake remains still and vast, its secrets hidden in plain sight. Boats skim across its surface, unaware of what rests below. Tourists snap photos of ancient island shrines, never knowing that something far older may lie just beneath the waterline. Something once built by human hands, something someone decided should stay forgotten. The Dead Sea Scrolls that were never published. In 1947, on the dusty cliffs near Qumran by the edge of the Dead Sea, a young Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a cave and heard the unmistakable sound of pottery shattering. What he found inside wasn't treasure in the usual sense, it was something far more powerful. Hidden in clay jars were ancient scrolls, wrapped in linen, untouched for nearly 2,000 years. Over the next decade, thousands of fragments would be pulled from caves across the region. Together, they became known as the Dead Sea Scroll Zone, of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But what many don't know is that not all of the scrolls were shared with the world. Some were kept in the dark, unpublished, untranslated, and locked away. And the reasons for that silence remain deeply unsettling. Most of the scrolls were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and included copies of Old Testament texts, commentaries, community rules, and apocalyptic visions. Some were remarkably intact, while others were shattered into thousands of brittle shards. As soon as they were discovered, religious institutions and universities raced to collect, catalogue, and study them. The Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem became the center of this effort. But instead of publishing the findings openly, a small team of scholars, most of them connected to the church or conservative academic institutions, was given exclusive access. For decades, they held a monopoly over the scrolls. Outside, researchers were barred from viewing them, and when questions arose about what was being withheld, the answers were vague at best. By the 1970s, it became clear that hundreds of scroll fragments, possibly thousands, remained untranslated. Some of these texts, it was whispered, contained ideas and narratives that didn't align with established religious doctrine. Early leaks from scholars spoke of alternative creation stories, references to multiple messiahs, and prophetic warnings that didn't match anything found in the canonical Bible. One fragment, known as the Temple Scroll, described building dimensions and rituals unlike anything in Jewish or Christian texts. Another hinted at a figure called the Teacher of Righteousness, who some believed may have predated Jesus and challenged everything about the timeline of early religious movements. It wasn't until the early 1990s that the academic monopoly finally began to break. A group of independent researchers managed to photograph and reconstruct many of the unpublished scrolls using new imaging technology. The Huntington Library in California released its copies of the images, allowing wider access. But even then, certain scrolls remained missing. Some had reportedly gone into private collections. Others, scholars claimed, had mysteriously disintegrated or were deemed too damaged to ever be translated. Still, others were simply marked restricted, and no one, no even qualified historians, was permitted to study them. The Vatican has long been accused of playing a behind-the-scenes role in the suppression. While it officially denies holding any of the scrolls, several of the early scholars who oversaw the documents were Catholic priests. Some believe these men cherry-picked what was released, choosing texts that supported biblical continuity and quietly sidelining anything that raised doubts. Among the most controversial were the so-called end-time scrolls documents, allegedly describing cosmic wars, fallen angels, and a timeline of destruction that bore eerie similarities to the Book of Revelation, but with strikingly different details. There are also allegations of scrolls that suggest the existence of lost books of the Bible texts, once accepted by early Jewish or Christian communities, but later removed. These might include alternate versions of Genesis, Gospels not attributed to the four canonical authors, or writings attributed to figures like Enoch, whose stories were largely scrubbed from religious tradition. If any of that is true, then the scrolls don't just fill in historical gaps, they reveal an entirely different shape to the spiritual history of the Western world. Today, the Israel Antiquities Authority maintains possession of the scrolls, and many of them are on display at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. But behind the glass cases and museum lighting, there are still locked drawers and sealed archives. Scrolls that haven't been seen in decades, fragments catalogued but never translated. Pieces of a story that may have been too complexer, too dangerous to tell. In the end, what matters most isn't what we've read in the scrolls. It's what we don't have, because somewhere in those silent, crumbling texts may lie ideas that challenge everything we thought we knew. And someone, somewhere, decided long ago that the world might not be ready to read them. The Lost Labyrinth of Hawara. In the sands of Egypt, south of Cairo, and just outside the village of Hawara, lies the buried remains of a structure that ancient writers once described in breathless detail, but which modern history has all but erased. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, claimed it was more impressive than anything he had seen in Egypt, including the pyramids themselves. He called it the Labyrinth, a sprawling underground complex with thousands of chambers, halls, and passageways, so vast and complex that no one could map it completely. But today, if you go to Hawara, there's almost nothing to see, just cracked earth, faint outlines of stone, and silence. Whatever this labyrinth was, it's been buried and, for reasons no one will clearly explain. Herodotus wasn't the only one to describe it. Pliny the Elder, Diodorus, Siculus, and Strabo all spoke of the labyrinth as a real place. They described multiple levelsome above ground, some below, and halls supported by pillars carved with sacred inscriptions. Statues lined the corridors, hidden chambers lay behind false walls. And at its heart, it was said to contain the tomb of a king, guarded by traps and secrets meant to keep intruders away. According to these ancient writers, it stretched over 500 feet in length and was built near the pyramid of Amenemhat III, one of the most powerful pharaohs of Egypt's 12th dynasty. But when early explorers and archaeologists began looking for the labyrinth in the 19th century, they found very little. The area around Hawara had been looted for centuries, and the desert had reclaimed most of what was once there. In 1888, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie led a major excavation of the site. He discovered a massive field of stone blocks just beneath the surface, flattened and broken, as if something enormous had once been deliberately dismantled. He believed he had found the remains of the labyrinth, but what he described didn't match the grandeur of the ancient accounts. Still, his notes hinted at something larger. He reported underground chambers filled with debris, strange walls that led nowhere, and sealed doors that were never opened. And then the excavation stopped. For nearly a century, little more was done. The site was declared too damaged to be worth further exploration. The idea of the labyrinth faded from textbooks, reduced to a footnote or a legend. But in 2008, a team of researchers from Belgium and Egypt conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area around Hawara. What they discovered shocked them. Beneath the sand and stone, there appeared to be an enormous rectangular structure, 300 meters wide and nearly 250 meters long, buried under several layers of sediment. The radar images showed walls, chambers, and patterns that strongly resembled the descriptions passed down from antiquity. The discovery was announced at a conference in Ghent, and for a moment, there was hope that the labyrinth would finally be brought back into the light. But almost immediately, the project was shut down. Egyptian authorities denied the researchers further access. The radar data was removed from official websites. No formal explanation was given. The labyrinth, it seemed, was to remain buried once again. Why? That's the question that has never been answered. Was it a matter of funding, conservation, or did the radar scans reveal something deeper? Something that someone didn't want uncovered? Some believe the labyrinth may have contained records, ancient scrolls, lost knowledge, or objects that predate Egypt's dynastic history. Herodotus himself mentioned that the walls were covered in carvings, possibly Texan, that beneath the structure lay crypts and tombs that had never been entered. If even part of that is true, then the labyrinth could hold insights not just into Egyptian history, but into the origins of civilization itself. Yet, year after year, the sand remains undisturbed. Tourists are steered toward the more photogenic pyramids. The few who venture to Hawara find a fenced-off site with no excavation, no guides, and no mention of a labyrinth. Official records list it as a ruined mortuary temple, nothing more. But if the radar scans are accurate, and if Herodotus and his fellow historians weren't lying then, Hawara may still be hiding one of the greatest architectural and archaeological wonders ever built. A place designed to confuse, conceal, and protect. A structure buried not by accident, but by intent. And whatever lies beneath that silent stretch of desert, someone, somewhere, has decided the world isn't ready to see it. The Bosnian Pyramid Excavation Ban. In the quiet town of Visoko, Bosnia, a hill rises steeply from the landscape, steep enough, symmetrical enough, that it doesn't quite look natural. Locals had always called it Visočica Hill. But in 2005, everything changed when a Bosnian-American archaeologist named Semir Osmanagić announced something extraordinary. The hill, he said, wasn't just a hill, it was a pyramid. Not only that it was the largest and oldest pyramid in the world. At first, the claim was met with disbelief. Bosnia, after all, isn't exactly known for ancient megalithic structures. But Osmanagić began excavating, and what his team uncovered sent ripples through the archaeological community. Layers of stone blocks large, flat, and stacked in geometric patterns began to emerge from the soil. Long, flat terraces, sharp angles, slabs that seemed to form paved walkways or retaining walls. And beneath it all, an extensive network of underground tunnels snaked deep under the ground, some wide enough to walk through, others narrow and choked with sediment. The formations didn't look like natural geology. Not to everyone. Some geologists claimed the slabs were simply natural concretion-shard layers of sediment shaped by erosion, but others weren't so sure. Independent researchers who visited the site reported what looked like artificial construction man-made channels, drilled holes, and a consistent orientation of stone layers, unlike anything produced by chance. Even stranger, some of the tunnels emitted unusually high levels of negative ions, which some believed had effects on the human body, including feelings of calm and heightened awareness. As media attention grew, so did the backlash. Leading archaeologists from universities across Europe condemned the dig. They called it a pseudoscience circus, a waste of resources, and a distraction from Bosnia's real archaeological heritage. A formal statement from the European Association of Archaeologists dismissed the site entirely, declaring that no pyramids exist in Bosnia. That declaration, however, was based solely on surface surveys. Most of the signatories had never visited the site, and the excavation was already turning up more questions than answers. Soon after, the Bosnian government stepped in. Funding was withdrawn. Permits became harder to obtain. By 2007, most formal excavations had been banned, and officials placed restrictions on any digging not directly overseen by state-approved institutions. The official reason was conservation to protect local heritage from unscientific tampering. But critics noted something strange. No alternative investigation was launched. No official teams were dispatched to disprove or validate the pyramid theory. It was simply closed off. Osman Agic, undeterred, continued working with volunteers and private supporters. Over the years, his team has cleared and reinforced parts of the tunnels, removed massive stone blocks, and discovered what they claim are ancient inscriptions and anomalies in the magnetic field. Every summer, visitors from around the world come to see the Bosnian pyramids, as they're now widely known. Some call it a spiritual center. Others see it as a suppressed discovery one that challenges the accepted timeline of human history in Europe. The most controversial part of the entire mystery isn't the pyramid itself, it's the silence around it. Why hasn't a single major university launched a formal investigation? Why are there no academic grants to study the underground structures, the carved stone, or the apparent alignment of the pyramid's faces with true north? Why is the instinct always to deny rather than to verify? Some insist the real answer is buried in the symbolism of the pyramid. If it's real, if someone truly built a massive, complex structure in Bosnia over 0 years ago, it would rewrite not just local history, but everything we think we know about pre-Ice Age civilizations. It would suggest that advanced construction, geometry, and social organization existed in Europe long before Mesopotamia, long before Egypt. And for many institutions built on the idea of gradual, linear progress, that's a deeply inconvenient idea. The hill at Visoko hasn't changed much in centuries. Trees grow along its slopes, houses dot its base. But inside the tunnels, the stone feels older than the soil itself. There are corners where the air turns unnaturally cool, where walls bear strange patterns that have never been explained. Visitors describe the feeling of stepping into something ancient, something not meant to be understood easily. Whatever the truth behind the Bosnian pyramid, one thing is clear: the mystery hasn't been solved, it's been silenced. And in the absence of clear answers, the hill watches quietly over the valley, keeping its secrets where no one is allowed to dig. The underground tunnels of Derinkuyu. In the heart of Cappadocia, Turkey, a region already known for its surreal landscapes and honeycombed cliffs, a strange discovery was made in 1963 that turned a local home renovation into one of the most baffling archaeological revelations in modern history. A man, knocking down a wall in his basement, stumbled into a narrow passage carved straight into the volcanic rock. It didn't just lead to a hidden room, it kept going. Tunnels, stairs, chambers. And as authorities were called in and the digging continued, they realized what they had uncovered wasn't just a room or a shell turret, was an entire underground city. The place came to be known as Derinkuyu, and what lies beneath it defies belief. It's not a ruin in the traditional sense. It's not a cave. It's a fully formed city, carved into stone, sprawling downward through 18 levels and stretching over 280 feet beneath the surface. There are rooms for sleeping, kitchens with ventilation shafts, wine and oil presses, wells, religious sanctuaries, schools, stable 7 graveyards. It could house, by conservative estimates, over 20 people, and everything about it seems to have been planned with careful intent. The tunnels are narrow, often just wide enough for one person to squeeze through, but the chambers are spacious. The air shafts are perfectly placed, delivering fresh air to the deepest levels. Massive circular stone doors, weighing up to 10 pounds, could be rolled into place to block entrances like ancient blast doors sealing off sections of the city in case of invasion. Fresh water flowed from underground springs, and food could be stored for months. Whoever built Derinkuyu didn't just dig to hide, they prepared to survive. The official explanation is that Derinkuyu was built in stages over centuries, possibly starting in the 8th or 7th century BCE, later expanded by early Christians fleeing persecution. But that explanation falls apart the deeper you go. The lowest levels are the most advanced, the hardest to reach, the ones that would require the most planning. And yet, no one can say with certainty who created the original tunnels, or why. No inscriptions mark the walls, no documents were left behind. The stone doesn't tell its age. It just tells us that someone, long ago, possessed the knowledge and manpower to remove thousands of tons of volcanic rock with surgical precision and leave behind a labyrinth that even today feels alien in its design. Some researchers have quietly questioned the official story, not because they want to stir controversy, but because Derinkuyu doesn't follow a logical timeline. How could ancient people, with primitive tools, carve such a vast and efficient system beneath solid rock without leaving any clear sign of their technology or purpose? Why build so deep? Why create hidden air vents and emergency exits, unless the threat was enormous long-term? There are local legends, older than Christianity, that speak of underground refuges, built to protect people not from armies, but from something far worse. Some versions mention fire raining from the sky. Others speak of ancient enemies that hunted from above. It's easy to dismiss these stories as metaphors until you stand inside Derinkuyu, see how complex it is, and realize it wasn't built for convenience. It was built for fear. Only a portion of Derinkuyu is accessible now, carefully lit and open for tourists. But the majority of the city remains sealed, its deeper corridors closed behind locked gates or blocked by unstable rock. Exploration teams are limited and new surveys are rare. Whispers persist of lower levels still untouched, where the tunnels stretch farther than anyone expected. Occasionally, a new passage is found by accident during renovations in nearby villages, hinting that Derinkuyu might just be a single piece of a vast hidden world carved beneath the landscape. There are no tombs in Derinkuyu, no royal chambers, no treasure. What it holds is more unsettling. The quiet suggestion that someone, thousands of years ago, knew they would need to vanish below ground and did so with planning, technology, and purpose that history has chosen not to explain. Above, the surface of Cappadocia is bright and windswept, dotted with tourists and balloon rides. Below, the silence of Derinkuyu still stretches through the stone. It asks no questions. It answers none. It just waits. Somewhere beyond the last carved wall, the rock may still carry echoes, footsteps, voices, or the quiet breath of those who vanished into the stone. And maybe, in the silence that surrounds it, Derinkuyu is still doing exactly what it was built to do: keep something out or keep something in. The giant skeletons of Catalina Island. Off the coast of Southern California, Catalina Island basks in sunlight and sea breeze, its cliffs and coves drawing in tourists year-round. To most, it's a peaceful getaway, filled with hiking trails, bison herds, and ocean views. But beneath that idyllic surface lies a strange and unsettling story, one that nearly vanished from history, not because it was discredited, but because it was quietly ignored. During the early decades of the 20th century, an eccentric archaeologist named Ralph Glidden began digging across Catalina Island. He wasn't backed by a university or major institution. He was self-funded, obsessive, and more collector than scientist. Between 1919 and 1930, Glidden claimed to have opened over 800 ancient burial sites across the Channel Islands. But it was what he said he found among the bones that caught the world's attention: skeletons of men and women far taller than average, some measuring over 8 feet in height, with massive skulls and features that didn't fit neatly into accepted human ancestry. According to Glidden, these individuals were not only tall, they were different. Some skulls were elongated. A few had unusual dental patterns, including what he described as double rows of teeth. In several instances, he documented jawbones so large they could be placed over a modern man's face. He took photographs, wrote letters, and even built a small museum in Avalon to display his findings, lining walls with giant bones and glass cases filled with tools, ornaments, and skulls. Newspapers wasted no time picking up the story. Headlines across the country described a mysterious race of giants buried beneath the hills of Catalina. But just as quickly as the excitement flared, it was extinguished. Mainstream archaeologists issued harsh criticisms. Glidden was dismissed as an amateur, his methods labelled careless and unscientific. Major institutions showed little interest in verifying his claims, and one by one, the bones disappeared. Some were said to have been shipped off to the Smithsonian. Others allegedly went to private collections or were quietly stored away in museums that never put them on display. Glidden's museum was eventually shut down. His field notes, once full of meticulous measurements and diagrams, ended up scattered across dusty archives and forgotten filing cabinets. Today, no official record lists the giant skeletons. Only yellowed newspaper clippings, a few black and white photos, and Glidden's increasingly rare journal entries remain. There's a particular kind of silence that follows stories like this, not the silence of mystery, but the silence of something deliberately set aside. If Glidden had been mistaken or fraudulent, one would expect an academic rebuttal backed by a thorough investigation. Instead, there was dismissal without examination. No modern team has been allowed to return to those specific burial sites. Many have been built over. Others fall under conservation laws that limit further digging. And yet, questions remain. Surviving photographs show Glidden beside skulls that seem far too large to belong to ordinary human remains. His written records are remarkably consistent, especially considering the volume of excavations he conducted. Even if some measurements were exaggerated, how could every one of them be entirely wrong? The Tongva people, native to the region, have their legend stories passed down for generations about powerful, tall beings who once lived on the islands. Spanish missionaries in the 18th century recorded similar tales, which they largely dismissed as folklore. But Glidden's discoveries seem to echo those stories in unnerving ways, as if myth and material evidence were quietly converging in a place few thought to look. Catalina Island remains a serene destination, its quiet cliffs betraying none of the controversy buried beneath them. Tourists hike past unmarked hillsides and eat lunch near places where entire grave sites were unearthed and then forgotten. No signs mark the locations, no plaques explain what was found. Time and salt air have covered the scars of excavation, but somewhere the bones may still exist in locked drawers, mislabeled boxes, or the archives of institutions that no longer speak of them. And if those remains ever resurface, the most disturbing part won't be the size of the skeletons or the shape of their skulls. It will be the quiet certainty that someone, at some point, chose to erase them. Not because they weren't real, but because they were. The pyramid-like structure in Antarctica. Deep in the frozen expanse of Antarctica, where temperatures plunge far below zero and the wind never really stops howling, something juts out of the snow that shouldn't be there. Among the endless white and jagged ice ridges, a sharp, angular formation breaks the horizon. Its sides, unnaturally smooth, its shape almost too precise. From above, it doesn't look like a mountain. It looks like a pyramid. Satellite imagery, first circulated widely in the early 2010s, captured a triangular structure near the Ellsworth Mountains. Unlike the surrounding peaks, which are irregular and windswept, this one appeared geometrically perfect, with 3 visible sides converging to a single point. The dimensions were striking. Each face seemed aligned almost symmetrically. Some compared it to the Great Pyramid of Giza. But while Giza stands in the heat of the Egyptian desert, this shape stood alone in a frozen wasteland, thousands of miles from any ancient civilization, or so we think. What followed wasn't a scientific expedition or a media investigation. It was silence. Official sources either ignored the images or dismissed them as natural rock formations sculpted by ice and time. That explanation might have been enough if it weren't for the fact that no one had seen anything quite like it before. Geologists pointed out that mountains don't usually form with equal sides and sharp edges unless something unusual shapes them. And the more the public looked, the more questions were raised. Some theorists suggested the structure could be part of a buried complex, mostly hidden beneath the ice. After all, Antarctica holds a landscape that's been sealed away for tens of thousands of years. Beneath the ice sheet lie valleys, freshwater lakes, and even ancient mountain ranges, entire environments locked in cold silence. In recent years, radar scans have revealed hundreds of subglacial anomalies, dome-like shapes, geometric ridges, and deep tunnels that extend for miles. But the moment someone brings up lost civilizations or hidden ruins, the conversation ends. And the pyramid near the Ellsworth Mountains is no exception. There have been whispers of past expedition teams sent out to examine the site up close, but documentation is scarce. Names are rarely attached to these missions, and results are never made public. Some researchers believe the structure was known to military forces as early as the 1950s, during the early days of Antarctic exploration. The timing is interesting. Around that same period, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, banning all military activity and limiting civilian research under strict international oversight. The continent was effectively sealed, protected, yes, but also hidden. It's easy to imagine a world where an ancient structure lies buried under 2 miles of ice, preserved perfectly in the cold, waiting to be discovered. And if such a place were ever found, the implications would be enormous. It would challenge every assumption we've made about human history, timelines, and migration. It would suggest that someone, long before our accepted ancient civilizations, had the knowledge and ability to reach the farthest corners of the earth and leave their mark. Skeptics argue that the pyramid-like shape is a coincidence, that it's just a Nunataka peak of rock that breaks through the surface of the ice. But not all Nunataks look like this, and few, if any, resemble man-made structures with such symmetrical proportions. More troubling is the lack of follow-up. In an age where satellite data is available to anyone, where drones can be launched and 3D terrain models generated in hours, no detailed expedition has been mounted to resolve the mystery once and for all. Instead, the images sit quietly online, debated in forums, speculated on in documentaries, but never confronted directly. It's as if the shape itself, buried, remote, and inconvenient, has been left to sink back into the snowdrifts of forgetfulness. From the air, the pyramid still casts a clean shadow across the ice. It doesn't erode, It doesn't crumble. It just waits, indifferent to who notices and who doesn't. Maybe it's just a mountain. Maybe the wind carved it that way, perfectly by accident. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the tip of something far older something, sleeping beneath Antarctica, waiting for the world to be ready to see it. And if that day ever comes, the question won't just be what lies underneath, but why it stayed hidden for so long. In a place where almost nothing survives the cold, perhaps the truth did. The lost city beneath the Amazon. There's a kind of silence in the Amazon that feels different from other places, thick, living, and ancient. The trees stretch so high and the undergrowth is so dense that sound doesn't carry the same way. Everything is wrapped in green. But beneath that endless canopy, where the jungle floor remains hidden from satellites and unreachable by roads, researchers are starting to see something they never expected: cities. Not just scattered villages or camps, but signs of complex, sprawling civilizations long thought impossible in this part of the world. For centuries, the idea of a lost city in the Amazon was treated as a legend. European explorers heard stories from indigenous tribes about immense stone cities swallowed by the forest. The most famous of these was El Dorado, city of gold that drove hundreds of expeditions into the jungle, most of which ended in failure or death. By the 20th century, archaeologists had largely written off the notion. The soil in the rainforest was too poor to support large populations. The terrain was too harsh. The jungle, they said, could never have supported a city. But the jungle doesn't give up its secrets easily. In 2001, Brazilian archaeologist Michael Heckenberger began documenting the remains of a vast network of settlements in the Upper Xingu region. These weren't crude villages. They had roads, bridges, causeways, and moats. The layout suggested planning, geometry, culture. Some settlements were connected by straight roads stretching for miles. The people who lived there had reshaped the land with their own hands and then vanished. More recently, LiDAR technology laser scanning from aircraft that strips away the forest canopy has revealed even more. In 2022, a team scanning parts of the Bolivian Amazon uncovered dozens of structures hidden under the trees, including pyramids, elevated causeways, canals, and platforms. The cities were massive, not just isolated groups, but interlinked hubs, what one researcher called urbanism in the rainforest. These findings weren't just surprising, they overturned decades of assumptions. And yet, there's a strange discomfort around these discoveries. They're acknowledged, yes, the scans are real, the structures are mapped, but full-scale excavations are rare. Access is limited. And funding for further exploration often dries up without explanation. Some of the LiDAR data remains unpublished. And no one can seem to agree on why the people who built these cities vanished or how such complex societies existed for so long without leaving behind the towering monuments seen in Egypt or Mesoamerica. There are whispers, especially among local communities, that more lies hidden: temples, artifacts, even written records sealed in caves or buried under mounds that still haven't been touched. But the jungle is both a protector and a destroyer. It hides things quickly, and once something is lost beneath its roots and rivers, getting it back requires more than just shovels and curiosity. It requires permission, it requires control, and sometimes those in charge of access aren't interested in letting the past rise to the surface. Some researchers believe these cities collapsed after disease swept through the population, brought by early European contact and spreading faster than the explorers themselves. Others say climate change, war, or environmental collapse played a role, but those are just guesses. No one knows for sure. What's left are fragments foundations, earthworks, ceramic shards, and roads that lead deeper into the forest than anyone has followed. It's not that we're missing pieces of the puzzleites, that we didn't even know a puzzle existed until recently. For generations, the narrative was simple. The Amazon was untouched, wild, and empty of civilization. Now we know that wasn't true. It wasn't untouched. It was overgrown. And the people who lived there may have known things about ecology, agriculture, and urban planning that we still don't fully understand. The forest is changing. Climate shifts, deforestation, and mining are eating away at the canopy. With every tree that falls, the earth beneath reveals a little more of what it's been hiding. Sometimes a carved stone. Sometimes a mound is too perfect to be natural. But each one is a doorway to a past someone decided wasn't worth remembering, or perhaps one that was never meant to be remembered at all. Whatever lies beneath the Amazon still hasn't finished speaking. The question is whether anyone's truly ready to listen. The sealed Mayan cave of Balamku. In 2019, deep beneath the Yucatan Peninsula, archaeologists crawling through a narrow, winding tunnel stumbled into a space no one had entered in over 1,000 years. The air was stale. The ceiling pressed low. Bats clung silently to the stone. And in the flicker of their headlamps, the explorers saw something astonishing: hundreds of ritual objects, untouched, undisturbed, and perfectly preserved. Pots, incense burners, ceremonial offerings. The cave was called Balamku, and it had remained sealed since the time of the ancient Maya. But what should have been a groundbreaking discovery quickly became something else, something wrapped in silence. The entrance to the cave had been found once before, in 1966. A government archaeologist named Victor Segovia Pinto made it inside, documented what he saw, then ordered the cave resealed. No excavation, no publication, nothing was shared with the world. For more than 50 years, the existence of Balamku was forgotten. No one knew why it had been hidden away. No one knew what had been found inside. It simply vanished from the academic record, as if it had never existed. When a team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History rediscovered the site in 2018 and entered it in early 2019, they found everything exactly as it had been left. Offering vessels still arranged as if for ceremony, soot still clinging to the cave walls from ancient fires. Nothing had been looted, nothing had been removed. The chamber was frozen in time. Experts immediately recognized the importance of the find. Balamku was located just a few kilometers from Chichen Itza, one of the most studied and visited Maya cities in the world. And yet, here was a site of clear ceremonial significance, untouched by modern hands, linked directly to the same people and beliefs that built the temples above. But then, once again, the conversation around Balamku seemed to evaporate. News coverage was brief, follow-up reports were sparse. Despite the enormous potential of the discovery offering new insight into Maya religious practices and the underworld mythology of Xibalbada, were no major excavation campaigns, no global exhibits, no academic floodgates opening. Instead, the cave was sealed again, this time for preservation, according to official statements. There's a pattern to find like this. Something is uncovered that challenges the edges of accepted history. It sparks interest, excitement, and questions. Then the doors close, sometimes literally. The reasons always sound logical: environmental protection, funding issues, and the need for careful study. But with Balamku, the questions go deeper. Why was it sealed the first time? Why was it hidden for half a century. And now that it's been found again, why does it feel like the same thing is happening all over? Some researchers have suggested that the offerings in Balamku may be linked to royal rituals, possibly even to the rulers of Chichen Itza themselves. Others believe the cave served as a portal to the Maya underworld, a site for communication with gods or ancestors. The arrangement of objects seems intentional, symbolic. But without full access, without public data, most of what we know comes from early press releases and cautious interviews. The deeper interpretations, the ones that might shift timelines or cultural understandings, remain behind closed doors. The physical layout of the cave also raises eyebrows. It's not easy to enter. The passages are tight, disorienting, and often require crawling for long distances. Some sections are nearly impassable without specialized gear. Yet the Maya used it regularly, bringing offerings deep into the earth. That effort, that level of ritual devotion, suggests something profoundly important took place inside. Something worth preserving or hiding. Authorities may be genuinely trying to protect the site. The Yucatan's climate is harsh. Human presence can quickly damage fragile environments. But even so, the silence feels heavy. There's no timeline for further study, no updates on analysis, no new imagery or models shared with the public. Just a vague sense that something extraordinary was found and then quietly shelved. Today, Balamku remains sealed again, its ancient objects still resting in the dark. Whatever secrets the Maya left inside are still there, still waiting. Maybe the world will see them someday. Or maybe, just like in 1966, the cave will simply be forgotten, again another discovery, buried not by time, but by choice. The Lake Michigan Stone Circle. In the summer of 2007, a team of researchers using sonar to survey the floor of Lake Michigan made a strange discovery. They were mapping shipwrecks, scanning for old wooden hulls buried beneath layers of silt and cold fresh water. But one scan revealed something they didn't expect: a circular arrangement of stones resting quietly 40 feet below the surface, deep in Grand Traverse Bay. It looked like a formation, deliberate, placed. One of the stones appeared different from the rest. It had markings what some said looked like an engraving of a mastodon, an extinct animal that roamed North America more than 10 years ago. If the carving was authentic, it would push the origins of the stone circle into the prehistoric period, far beyond anything officially recorded in that part of Michigan. It didn't match known Native American structures. It didn't match colonial history. It didn't match anything. The man behind the survey was Dr. Mark Holley, a professor of underwater archaeology. At first, he kept the discovery quiet, sharing it only with colleagues and local officials. There was hesitation, maybe even anxiety. Announcing a find like that, especially in North America, meant stepping into a minefield of scientific scrutiny. But the images spoke for themselves. A ring of stones, a possible carving, and no easy explanation. When word finally leaked to the public, media interest surged. People began calling it the Michigan Stonehenge, though that comparison was more poetic than accurate. Still, the implications were huge. If people had been organizing massive stones into ceremonial or astronomical formations in the Great Lakes region 10 years ago, it meant rethinking everything we thought we knew about prehistoric North America. And then, almost as quickly as it surfaced, the story went quiet. No major institutions stepped forward to lead an excavation. No follow-up research was funded at a national level. The location of the site was kept secret supposedly to protect it from looters or curiosity seekers, but also making it impossible for outside experts to verify the claim. Requests for clearer images or physical access were politely denied. The site, in essence, vanished back beneath the water. Skeptics argued that the stones could be natural, the carving might just be erosion or wishful thinking, but those same voices didn't request a deeper investigation. They just dismissed the possibility. There was no formal debunking, no rigorous peer-reviewed rejection, just a shrug and silence. Part of the issue, some suggest, is the uncomfortable timing. If the site really did date back over 10 years, it would have been constructed at a time when glaciers still lingered nearby, when the landscape was radically different, and when mainstream archaeology says humans in North America were still primitive hunter-gatherers. Stone circles don't fit that timeline. Neither do carvings of extinct animals have symbolic intent. The evidence suggested something organized, spiritual, maybe even astronomical, and that didn't sit well with the established narrative. Even stranger is the lack of urgency. In other parts of the world, a submerged stone circle would spark immediate international attention, divers, funding, a documentary crew. But here, it was left to one small team with limited resources and no clear mandate. The photographs exist, the sonar scans were real. Yet more than a decade later, the site has never been revisited in any serious public way. Some hold the view that the formation in Grand Traverse Bay isn't the only one. Over the years, fishermen have described sonar readings that show oddly precise shapes beneath the waves grids, circles, lines too regular to be chance. A handful of divers have spoken about strange stone arrangements found in other parts of the Great Lakes, but their accounts rarely leave local circles. Without photos or funding, their stories get dismissed as misreadings or tricks of the light. Still, it feels as though curiosity is being quietly discouraged, as if looking too closely might raise questions no one wants answered. The Lake Michigan Circle is still there, resting beneath the waves, unchanged. The stones haven't moved. The carving, if it really is a carving, hasn't faded. Only the interest in it has. Whatever questions it raises remain unanswered, not because there's no evidence, but because no one seems eager to ask. And maybe that's the most unsettling part, not the mystery of who placed those stones, or when, or why, but the fact that a discovery capable of rewriting history can simply be left underwater, ignored not by time, but by choice. The mysterious black sarcophagus in Alexandria. When construction workers in Alexandria broke ground for a new building in July 2018, they didn't expect to hit something ancient. But just 5 meters below the surface, buried beneath layers of dust and broken stone, they uncovered a solid black sarcophagus. Massive, sealed, and undisturbed, it immediately caught the attention of archaeologists. At over 8 feet long and made of heavy granite, it was unlike the fragile coffins usually found in the area. And for once, no one had touched it in over 2,000 years. The moment photos surfaced online, people started speculating. The sarcophagus had an eerie, almost ominous look to it, completely unmarked, unusually dark, and so large it had to be moved with cranes. Some wondered if it held a forgotten pharaoh. Others feared something worse. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities tried to calm the public, but even their official statements carried a strange uncertainty. They didn't know who was inside. They didn't know what they'd find. All they knew was that it had remained sealed since at least the Ptolemaic period, possibly longer. The dig site was quickly secured. The media were kept at a distance. A few blurry images were released, but beyond that, access was tight. When they finally pried the lid open under full supervision, and behind barriers the air around the coffin turned foul. A reddish-brown liquid, thick and putrid, had filled the bottom of the sarcophagus. Inside were the skeletal remains of 3 individuals. No gold, no inscriptions, no identifying marks. Just water, bone, and decay. Officials claimed it was sewage that had leaked in through cracks over centuries. The explanation didn't sit right with everyone. What followed wasn't a clear investigation, it was confusion. The identities of the skeletons were never confirmed. One had suffered what looked like blunt force trauma to the skull. Another appeared to be a soldier, based on remnants of arrowheads nearby, but nothing added up. No tomb markers, no preserved organs, no sign of mummification. And still, no one could say why the sarcophagus had been buried in such a deliberately hidden way, or why it had been so carefully sealed. For a few days, the black coffin was all over the news. People joked about curses. Some even demanded that the red liquid be bottled and sold online. But just as quickly as the story appeared, it was gone. No follow-up press releases, no museum exhibitions, no official report has been made publicly available. The sarcophagus was moved, the site was cleared, and once again, the past slipped back into silence. Several accounts hinted at things that never made it into the official reports. People close to the dig spoke quietly about measurements that didn't match expectations, bones that seemed too long, too strange. There were mentions of DNA testing, requests made behind closed doors, but the results, if they exist, were never shared with the public. Instead of answers, all that remains are scraps of speculation buried under the weight of silence. There's also the question of intent. Granite isn't easy to work with. Whoever made that sarcophagus went out of their way to use one of the toughest materials available, and then left it completely unmarked. No hieroglyphs, no symbols, no names. It's as if someone wanted the contents hidden not just physically, but historically, erased from the record. Even stranger is how quickly the discovery was shelved. In a country that proudly showcases its ancient history, this one was handled like a problem to be buried again. Experts gave vague answers. Public interest was brushed aside. And the coffin, so heavy it took machinery to lift, disappeared into storage without ceremony. Some things aren't hidden by time, they're hidden by people. The black sarcophagus should have raised more questions than answers, but those questions were quietly folded away. Whether it held political secrets, ancient shame, or something that didn't fit the historical narrative, we may never know. The silence around it isn't natural, it's chosen. And maybe that's the real story. Not what was inside the sarcophagus, but how quickly the world stopped asking about it. The past isn't always lost. Sometimes it's sealed on purpose. It makes you wonder how many other discoveries have been handled the same way, kept quiet, moved out of sight, never spoken of again. Not because they lack value, but because they challenge something deeper. Something that wasn't meant to be disturbed in the first place. The Yonaguni Monument Controversy. Off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, hidden beneath the rolling currents of the East China Sea, lies something that shouldn't exist. Massive stone terraces rise from the sea-floor flat platforms, sharp corners, and broad steps carved with geometric precision. The structure spans more than 300 feet, and parts of it look uncannily like an ancient temple or stepped pyramid. But it's not sitting on land, it's sitting under 100 feet of water. In 1986, a local diver named Kihachiro Aratake was surveying the waters near Yonaguni when he stumbled across the site. At first, He thought it was natural rocken. Unusual formation, maybe, but nothing more. Then he saw the edges, the symmetry, and he realized the stone didn't break apart the way most natural reefs do. When photos of the site made their way to the surface, they didn't look like random underwater rock. They looked like the ruins of something long lost. One of the first experts to investigate the site was Professor Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus. He spent years diving at Yonaguni, mapping the formation and studying its layout. According to him, the monument wasn't just a fluke of erosion, it was shaped, modified, built. He pointed to right-angled walls, straight staircases, and paths that resembled roads. In interviews, he spoke of pillars, altars, and what might even be carvings on some of the blocks. He believed the monument was man-made, possibly part of a lost civilization submerged thousands of years ago. But the academic world wasn't convinced. Other geologists dismissed the site as natural sandstone, sculpted by ocean currents and tectonic activity. They argued that the features, while strange, could occur through entirely natural processes. The debate became less about the evidence and more about control. If the structure was artificial, it meant rewriting part of Japan's ancient history. It meant accepting that organized human construction may have existed at a time far earlier than textbooks allow. And that possibility wasn't welcome. No formal excavation has ever taken place at the site. There are no protected research zones, no museum exhibits dedicated to Yonaguni, and very little government interest in pushing the investigation further. Despite being one of the most extraordinary underwater formations ever found, the monument sits largely ignored by official channels. Most academic institutions have distanced themselves from it entirely. There's no consensus, no funding, and no urgency. Tourists are allowed to dive there, and videos of the monument appear online from time to time. Swimmers hovering over perfectly carved ledges, trailing fingers along walls that look too smooth to be natural. But without sustained, coordinated study, those images are all that remain. There are no confirmed dates, no confirmed artifacts, and no cultural links to known civilizations. Just stone and silence. Kimura's claims were bold. He once stated the monument could be over 10 years old, submerged when sea levels rose after the last ice age. If true, that would place it well before any known complex society in the region. But that date was enough to make other researchers walk away. Instead of encouraging further study, the possibility of deep history shut the conversation down. Some researchers argue that the structure is part of a larger complex, possibly connected to other underwater sites in the area. Kimura claimed to have found roads, smaller monuments, and even what looked like writing on some surfaces. But his findings weren't welcomed into peer-reviewed journals. Critics called them pseudoscience. Without institutional support, the research stalled. The sea has a way of protecting its secrets. Visibility is poor, currents are strong, and storms can shift sand across the stone in hours. Even photographing the monument clearly is a challenge. And as the years pass, erosion continues. If the site was shaped by human hands, nature is slowly taking it back. Several divers still make the journey. They descend into the murky blue, following the ancient contours with cameras and hope. But until someone dares to challenge the silence, until someone funds the excavation or opens the archives, the Yonaguni monument will remain what it is, now a massive underwater question mark. Maybe it's just rock. Or maybe it's a chapter of human history that sank long before we learned to write it down. The Lost Taos Cave Expedition. Beneath the tangled green canopy of Ecuador's eastern jungle lies a cave system that stretches far deeper than most are willing to go. Known as Teos Cave, it runs beneath the Santiago River basin in the Morona-Santiago province, a dark labyrinth of shafts, chambers, and winding tunnels. For centuries, the local Shuar people ventured into its depths to collect oilbird chicks, but long before foreigners cared about the cave's wildlife, the stories were already thereof, something hidden beneath the earth that was never supposed to be found. By the late 1960s, those stories took on new weight when an explorer named Juan Morich claimed he had discovered an underground library inside the cave. According to his affidavit, the chamber he saw contained hundreds of metal books stacked in precise rows, engraved with unknown symbols, surrounded by carved statues and smooth, angular walls. He described it as the legacy of a lost civilization and insisted he had photographic proof. But he withheld the location, saying the world wasn't ready for what it revealed. The legend might have faded into obscurity if not for the author, Eric von Däniken, who brought the claim global attention in his book, The Gold of the Gods. He described the same metal library, the same golden sarcophagus, the same hall of alien-like artifacts, but later admitted he had never entered the cave. The descriptions, he said, were second-hand. That admission shifted the conversation from discovery to speculation, but by then, the idea had already taken root. In 1976, something unexpected happened. A joint British-Ecuadorian expedition was launched, involving scientists, military personnel, and even a world-famous astronaut. Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, was part of the team. The group spent over a month exploring Teos Cave, mapping its chambers, measuring its depths, and documenting what they could. Their presence gave the story legitimacy. If there was nothing down there, why bring someone like Armstrong? The official report stated that the cave was remarkable in its scale and geology, but no metal books were found, no golden coffins, no carvings or ancient libraries. What was presented to the public was dry and clinical beautiful formations, some man-made steps, and signs that the Shuar had used the cave for centuries. But something about the timing, the scale, and the silence that followed raised questions that still haven't been answered. Morich never recanted. He insisted the true chamber had been deliberately bypassed or kept secret. Others who worked with him claimed that parts of the cave were off-limits even to members of the official expedition. A few even suggested that certain items may have been quietly removed long before the public heard anything at all. The truth became tangled in secrecy, and without proof, speculation filled the gap. Access to the cave has become increasingly restricted. Reaching the entrance requires hours of travel through dense rainforest, followed by a vertical descent into darkness. Permits are difficult to obtain, and local guides are careful about where they'll take outsiders. The official reason is preservation and safety, but that hasn't stopped some from wondering if the restrictions serve another purpose entirely. Independent explorers have returned over the years with cameras and notebooks, hoping to find what Morich described. Videos show tight passageways, strange angles, and vast stone galleries hidden beneath the earth. But no one has ever revealed the metallic library. No photographs, no artifacts. Just stories repeating, evolving, surviving. The cave is real, that much is clear. Its depth, complexity, and isolation make it one of the most enigmatic places on the continent. But what remains unclear is why a cave that once drew global attention, backed by military support, and a moonwalker vanished so completely from academic interest. It's as if something was found, documented quietly, and then locked behind a wall of polite disinterest. At present, the cave still carries a weight that doesn't feel entirely geological. Its stone walls seem to absorb more than light. They hold on to something quieter. A story, maybe. A warning. The deeper explorers go, the more they talk about the silence. Not just the sound of earth, but the absence of answers. Whatever lies beyond the mapped sections may never be found again, either by design or by erasure. But if Moritz saw what he claimed, then part of our history is still down Theresield, in the dark, beneath the roots of the rainforest, waiting for someone who knows where to look. The Baghdad batteries that disappeared. They looked like ordinary clay jar small, unassuming, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a museum about ancient pottery. But in 1938, while excavating near Kujut Rabu, just outside of Baghdad, an archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig found something that didn't make sense. Inside several of these jars were copper cylinders, each containing an iron rod, all sealed with asphalt. No one knew exactly what they were, but when Koenig studied them closely, he began to suspect that they weren't simple containers. They might have been something far more advanced. Koenig published a paper in 1940, suggesting the possibility that these objects were ancient galvanic cell-sealy batteries, essentially. If filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or lemon juice, they could generate a small electrical charge. That idea alone was enough to unsettle the historical community. It pointed to a possibility that someone, thousands of years ago, understood how to make electricity. Not by accident, not through magic, but by design. The artifacts, now known as the Baghdad batteries, dated back to around 250 BCE, possibly even earlier. If Koenig's theory were right, it would completely rewrite the timeline of technological development. The problem was, no one wanted to rewrite anything. Mainstream historians quickly dismissed the idea, suggesting the jars were used for storing sacred scrolls or for holding ritual oils. The electrical theory was labelled speculative, unscientific, and slowly pushed out of the conversation. What happened next is harder to trace. For a time, the batteries were housed at the National Museum of Iraq, displayed with little fanfare. But as interest grew, fueled in part by fringe researchers and documentaries, the artifacts became harder to access. Scholars who asked to study them were told they were unavailable. At least one unit was quietly removed from the display. Eventually, photographs replaced the real items, and then even those faded from view. By the early 2000s, when the museum was looted during the US invasion of Iraq, reports surfaced that the batteries had vanished entirely. Some believed they were stolen, sold on the black market, alongside countless other ancient artifacts. Others claimed they had already been moved into private storage long before the invasion, taken off display for preservation. But whatever the truth is, the fact remains. No one seems to know where they are now. Not exactly, not officially. Experiments were carried out in the decades after Koenig's paper. Researchers replicated the design using modern materials and got the same results: a weak electrical current, just enough to plate a thin layer of metal or give a mild shock. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nonsense either. The idea that electricity might have been discovered, used, and forgotten long before the modern era didn't sound so far-fetched anymore. And that made some people uncomfortable. No large-scale dig was ever launched to investigate the area where the batteries were found. No funding was approved to look for more examples. The site was left alone, and the theory, like the artifacts, was boxed away. Over time, discussions about the Baghdad batteries moved from journals to conspiracy forums, from museums to message boards. The moment serious investigation became possible, it was already too late. The most frustrating part is how ordinary the story could have been. If the batteries had been preserved, studied openly, and taken seriously, they might have changed the way we understand ancient innovation. Instead, they were treated like an inconvenience, something that didn't belong. And in the end, they disappeared the same way so many other uncomfortable discoveries do, without answers, without closure, and a trace. There's still debate, of course. Some scientists cling to the storage jar theory. Others point out that a handful of artifacts isn't enough to declare an entire ancient science. But that misses the point. The real mystery isn't whether the Baghdad batteries were actually used to power something. It's why no one seems willing to find out. Why the objects vanished, why the site was left alone, and why history refuses to revisit them. Behind every sealed-off site, every vanished artifact, there's a decision being made. Sometimes silence speaks louder than evidence. The Baghdad batteries might have been a clue-owned tiny thread tugging at a much larger fabric, but if anyone pulled on it, they didn't pull for long. The Glosel tablets of France. The ground gave way in the spring of 1924. A young farmer named Émile Freydin was ploughing a field near the French village of Glossel when his cow's hoof broke through the soil. Beneath it, buried just beneath the surface, he uncovered a hollow cavity filled with stones, bones, and something else, each tablets, carved with symbols no one could read. At first glance, they looked ancient, but nothing about them matched the accepted timeline of European prehistory, and that, more than anything else, set everything in motion. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Archaeologists arrived, local officials, even curious strangers. Freydin and his grandfather opened the site to anyone interested, hoping the artifacts would speak for themselves. What they found shocked everyone. Hundreds of clay tablets and stone objects, many engraved with writing in a script that resembled nothing in the known historical record. Mixed among the pieces were bones, ceramic tools, engraved antlers, and what appeared to be ritual items. Some researchers declared the site to be revolutionary. They argued that the Glosel finds could date back to the Neolithic period, possibly as far as 10,000 years ago. If true, it would mean that writing in Europe existed far earlier than anyone believed, but not everyone was eager to accept that. The academic community split sharply. Some dismissed the finds as frauds planted by Freydin himself. Others accused the boy of having too much to gain from the attention and donations. A full investigation was launched. In 1927, a commission of French scholars arrived at the site and declared much of the material to be inauthentic. Their conclusion was based less on testing and more on doubt. They couldn't identify the script. The artifacts didn't fit into any known cultural category, and so they labelled it all a hoax. But behind the scenes, things weren't so simple. Some members of the commission later admitted they hadn't examined every object. Others quietly conceded they were pressured to issue a unified verdict. Freydin, still a teenager at the time, was devastated. Worse, he was arrested and charged with fraud. For years, the case remained frozen in controversy. But in the 1940s, new dating techniques began to cast doubt on the fraud claims. Thermoluminescence testing placed many of the Glosel ceramics between 300 BCE and 10 CE, centuries older than critics had claimed. Later studies showed the bones to be genuinely ancient. And in 1983, the French Ministry of Culture officially cleared Freydin of any wrongdoing. The Glozell findings were declared authentic. But by then, the damage had been done. What followed wasn't a revival of interest, it was silence. No major university launched new studies. The tablets remained largely untranslated, their script still undeciphered. Museum institutions kept their distance, and the debate that had once divided Europe's academic circles faded into obscurity. It was as if the story had never happened, as if the confusion it caused was too disruptive to revisit. The site and its artifacts still exist, but they're kept in a small private museum run by the Freydin family, not in Paris, not in London, not in any major archaeological institution. Researchers are welcome to visit, but few do. The Glozell tablets sit behind glass, quiet and untouched, while other discoveries cleaner, safer, more explainable are celebrated. Now and then, someone rediscovers the story and writes a new article or book. They revisit the old photographs, compare the symbols to other undeciphered scripts, and suggest links to Etruscan or Iberian cultures. But none of it changes the reality. Glozell reveals something out of place, out of time, and no one has figured out how to put it back into the official timeline. Some locals still talk about the day the earth opened up, that strange spring afternoon when something ancient came gasping into the light. They remember how quickly the quiet village turned into a place of suspicion, how foreign voices filled the fields, and newspapers turned Freydin from a curious boy into a figure of scandal. To them, Glozell was never just about tablets or bonesit, was about how the past can be stolen, not by time, but by those who refuse to see it. And long after the academics packed up their certainty and left, the weight of what might have been still presses down on the land, waiting for someone willing to believe the impossible deserves a second look. Maybe the site really does point to a forgotten chapter of European history, or maybe it's something smaller, a fragment of a culture erased before it left a name. Either way, the response tells its own story. The resistance, the accusations, the quiet dismissal. It's what happens when something doesn't fit. The Glozell tablets didn't just challenge what we know. They challenged who gets to decide what counts as history. And for that, they were buried a second Timeno, by soil, but by silence. The Nazi band dig at the Wilsberg Castle. Something is unnerving about Welsberg Castle, even before you know the history. Perched on a hill in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, it curves into a rare triangular shape, unlike almost any other fortress in Europe. But it wasn't the architecture that drew the attention of Heinrich Himmler in the 1930s. It was something older, something beneath. Himmler believed the castle stood on sacred ground, an ancient Germanic site of power that predated Christianity, possibly even humanity's known timeline. And once the Nazis took control of the property, they began digging, quietly, obsessively, and then, without warning, they stopped. Officially, Wilsberg was turned into an ideological training center for the SS. It was to be the spiritual heart of the Third Reich, a place where myth, magic, and militarism collided. Beneath the castle, construction crews widened chambers and reinforced tunnels. Some of the rooms were fitted with black marble floors, sunwheel motifs, and eerie crypt-like spaces with strange acoustic properties. But beyond the walls, open to ceremonial redesign, others remained sealed, rumoured to be part of something much deeper. Local workers brought in during the early years told of being sent down into shafts that disappeared into the rock. Some claimed they were digging out existing tunnels, not carving new ones. Others said they found things bones, carved stones, strange metallic objects, but were quickly reassigned or dismissed. Few records remain. Many of the men were prisoners of war or forced labourers. Their names were not preserved, and their testimonies came years later, mostly in whispers. One corridor in particular became the subject of intense interest. It led beneath the northwest tower, which Himmler considered the most sacred point of the structure. According to some accounts, that section was sealed off during the war, and no one aside from a select inner circle was allowed inside. There were rumors of excavations that struck something unexpected. Something not Roman, not medieval, but older, possibly prehistoric. Whatever it was, the digging stopped soon after, and any documentation, if it ever existed, disappeared in the chaos that followed. By the end of the war, Welsburg was on fire. The SS attempted to destroy parts of the castle to prevent Allied forces from uncovering what lay inside. Some tunnels collapsed, others were booby-trapped. When American and British troops arrived, they found a heavily damaged site with very little left intact. The ceremonial rooms had been stripped of documents, and most of the castle's inner workings had been erased. But they noticed something strange. Vast areas underground that led nowhere, passages that had clearly been active but now terminated in concrete or rubble. After the war, the castle was rebuilt and eventually converted into a museum. Tours walk visitors through the halls Himmler once paced, explaining the dark mythology the SS tried to weave into history. But what remains off-limits is just as telling. Several sections of the underground complex are sealed to this day, their contents unknown. Authorities say it's for safety unstable rock, old war damage, unexploded ordnance. Maybe that's true, or maybe it's a convenient way to keep old questions buried. Some historians believe the Nazis were trying to connect with something more than just heritage. They point to documents suggesting that Himmler consulted clairvoyants, dowsers, and esoteric scholars. Welsburg wasn't just a fortress. It was a ritual site, a symbolic centerpiece for a new mythic past the regime wanted to create. And that makes the sudden halt of their deepest excavations all the more curious. If they were trying to rewrite history, did they stumble on something they couldn't explain? The area surrounding the castle is dotted with natural caves, old mines, and forgotten ruins. In the years since the war, independent explorers have tried to map the underground layout using old plans and eyewitness reports. Some claim to have found walled-off corridors leading into the hill. Others report unusual magnetic readings and strange echoes near the sealed sections. But access is tightly controlled, and modern excavations are rarely permitted. There's no definitive proof of what was found beneath Welsburg Castle, only fragments of memory, scattered testimonies, and the sharp silence that followed. It's possible the Nazis uncovered nothing more than old foundations and chose to cloak the failure in mystery. But it's also possible they found something that didn't align with their narrative, something they couldn't use, and so they buried it again. Either way, the ground beneath the castle still holds its secrets, wrapped in the kind of history no one's eager to unearth. The disappeared map room under Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu rises out of the clouds like a secret someone tried to hide in plain sight. For most people, it's a marvel of stone terraces and sun temples, built high in the Andes by the Inca around the 15th century. But some researchers believe that what we see is only part of the story, that something far more extraordinary lies underneath. Stories have circulated for decades about a sealed chamber deep beneath the site, hidden beneath layers of rock and silence, a room said to contain something the Inca never meant to leave behind. A room some call the map room. The first serious hints of its existence surfaced in the early 2000s when a French explorer named Thierry Jamin led an expedition near a section of the site known as the Temple of the Three Windows. Using ground-penetrating radar, his team detected what appeared to be a rectangular cavity beneath the floor, unnatural in shape. possibly man-made. The data suggested a hollow chamber, sealed off, surrounded by walls and steps. Excitement followed, so did hesitation. Jamin petitioned the Peruvian Ministry of Culture for permission to excavate, but he was repeatedly denied. Officials argued that the site was too delicate, too sacred, too important to disturb. They acknowledged the anomaly, but claimed there wasn't enough evidence to justify a dig. Jamin's permits were revoked. His research team was blocked from the area. The story might have ended there. Except for one thing, he wasn't the only one who had heard about the chamber. Older records from local Quechua families and passed down oral stories speak of a place beneath Machu Picchu that once held the Incas' greatest knowledge. Not gold, not treasure, but information. A place where maps of the land, sky, and possibly something else were stored in symbolic form etched into the walls or carved into obsidian plates. It wasn't meant for conquerors. It wasn't meant for outsiders. It was sealed during the Spanish invasion and never reopened. In 2012, images and schematics from Jamin's radar scans leaked online. Independent researchers pored over them. Some said the chamber lined up with old Inca legends. Others noticed the rectangular void sat directly beneath a ceremonial platform area, often associated with ritual knowledge or passage to the spirit world. Yet despite the growing attention, official statements stayed the same. No digging would be allowed. Not now, not ever. Then something strange happened. Visitors to Machu Picchu in the years that followed reported seeing restricted zones near the Temple of the Sun suddenly expand. Security increased in subtle ways, more guards, new fences, silent detours around certain paths. Tour guides became unusually vague about questions involving underground chambers. It could all be a coincidence. But to those who had followed Jamin's work, it felt like something had changed behind the scenes. According to some accounts, the chamber was accessed quietly by a select team and then reburied. Others claim the government feared what might be uncovered, a narrative that doesn't match the accepted timeline, or worse, proof that ancient South American civilizations possessed astronomical and geographical knowledge beyond what historians currently accept. After all, the Incas built without mortar, aligned temples to the solstices, and tracked the stars with almost eerie precision. What if that knowledge came from somewhere deeper? The map room, if it exists, could offer answers. But it also raises uncomfortable questions. Why would a chamber remain hidden beneath one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world? And if its existence was confirmed, who would control what was found inside? Some of the equipment used during the early radar surveys has never been returned. Some documents tied to the expedition have vanished from public archives. And Thierry Jamin, once a regular face in Peruvian archaeological circles, now works largely outside the country. His findings are still available, but few in the academic community will acknowledge them openly. Machu Picchu stands as a testament to ingenuity, ritual, and vision, but it may also stand atop something that was never meant to be rediscovered, something older than empire, something buried not by time, but by decision. In the quiet stone corridors of the ruins, the unanswered questions hum beneath every step. And if there truly is a map beneath it all, the silence surrounding it may be the most carefully drawn boundary of all. The megaliths in Russia's Ural Mountains. Tucked deep within the Ural Mountains, where the forests grow thick and unbroken, and the wind carries more silence than sound, are stones that don't belong. They aren't scattered the way natural rocks fall. They're stacked precise, enormous, weathered, but oddly shaped, as if someone carved and placed them long before the trees grew tall around them. Some are said to weigh over 1,000 tons, far too large to have been moved by hand, even by today's standards. And yet they sit, balanced and fitted, as if waiting for someone to remember what they once were. Local hunters and hikers had passed by the formations for years. To them, they were just part of the landscapes, strange maybe, but not out of place in a region known for its rugged, isolated beauty. That changed in the 1990s when a handful of Russian researchers began documenting the sites. What they found didn't match any known geological pattern. The stones formed straight edges, right angles, and even layers features rarely found in natural formations of that size. In one report, a block was measured at over 0 tons larger than any known megalith in Egypt or South America. Word spread quickly, and whispers of ancient construction began to echo through the scientific community. But the enthusiasm was short-lived. Attempts to organize a formal expedition to the sites ran into resistance. Funding dried up without warning. Permits were delayed, then denied. In some cases, teams that had planned to visit the region were suddenly informed they could no longer access the area. Official explanations pointed to environmental concerns and safety hazards, but the pattern felt familiar to anyone who'd studied other buried discoveries. Interest was quietly redirected elsewhere. Photographs, when they surface, show stone blocks the size of small houses stacked along forested ridges, often partially buried in moss and soil. Some appear to have interlocking shapes, like giant puzzle pieces. Others bear marks that look too straight, too uniform, to be the result of erosion. Geological surveys suggest that the rocks themselves could be hundreds of millions of years old, but that doesn't explain the arrangement. No known culture in the region left behind records of construction on that scale. No tools have been found. No inscriptions. Just the stones, still and silent, standing against time. Local legends offer a different kind of explanation. The Mansi people, one of the indigenous groups of the Ural region, speak of an ancient civilization that lived in the mountains long before recorded history. They tell of giant beings, powerful and wise, who shaped the land and then disappeared into it. To them, the megaliths aren't ruins. They're remnants markers of a world that slipped away when humans forgot how to listen. One elder's account, recorded in the early 2000s, described the stones as the teeth of sleeping gods buried in the hills. Satellite images have been used to trace patterns between the megalithic sites. Some researchers claim they form a rough alignment stretching hundreds of kilometers. Theories abound. Some say the formations were part of a vast observatory. Others think they could be boundary markers, or even the foundations of structures now lost to time. A few suggest that the stones aren't just ancient, they're pre-human, built by a civilization that came before Homo sapiens ever walked the earth. It's an idea that many find too strange to accept, which is precisely why it's so rarely discussed in public. As with so many of these places, the questions hang heavier than the answers. Why has there been no serious excavation effort? Why are images of the formations so difficult to find? Why are those who try to study them dismissed or ignored? It's not that the evidence doesn't exist. It's that acknowledging it would require reshaping what we think we know about human history, and not everyone is ready for that. Ultimately, the Ural megaliths remain where they've always been, in the shadows of ancient forests, buried under snow and secrecy. Every few years, another hiker stumbles across them and wonders how they got there. A photograph appears online, then disappears. A brief spark of interest, followed by the usual silence. It's as if the stones themselves are keeping their memory, one that doesn't need to be believed to endure. Something was built there, something forgotten. And until someone is allowed to look deeper, that's all we're allowed to know. The buried pyramids of China. Hartwig Hausdorff stood at the edge of a restricted zone near Xi'an in 1994, staring across a quiet field that hid something few dared to name aloud. Locals called it nothing more than a hill, just another mound among dozens dotting the plains of Shaanxi province. But Hausdorff knew better. He had seen the satellite images, the straight lines, the perfect slopes. What lay ahead wasn't natural, it was enormous, and it was forbidden. His attempt to approach was halted by guards who offered no explanations, just warnings, no permits, no access, no questions. All he could do was document what was visible from afar, sharp angles breaking through the soil, alignments too precise to dismiss, and the eerie uniformity shared by every mound in the distance. It wasn't the lack of answers that chilled him. It was how firmly those answers were being kept from view. The Chinese government maintains that these are imperial tombs, mausoleums of early dynasties, most notably the Han. Some of them are acknowledged, even catalogued in academic literature, but only a handful have been touched. The largest, the one seen by American pilots in the 1940s and later dubbed the Great White Pyramid, remains unconfirmed, unexcavated, and unacknowledged in any official capacity. Its location is known. Its size is staggering. And yet, it's been buried again not by nature, but by silence. Decades earlier, in 1945 US, pilot James Gaussman flew over the region and claimed to have seen a colossal white pyramid shining in the sun, bigger than anything in Egypt. A few years later, Maurice Shahan described the same structure, and newspapers ran the story, complete with sketches. That story was quickly folded into obscurity. To this day, there's no official explanation for what they saw. Why is this site considered so sensitive? It's not just a matter of age or scale, it's what might be inside. Ancient Chinese records speak of burial chambers sealed with traps, celestial maps carved into ceilings, and rivers of mercury meant to mimic the cosmos. These weren't legends from distant lands. They were written in the historical texts of the region, texts referencing immortal palaces buried beneath the earth. In 2007, scientists testing the soil around the unopened tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang found mercury levels far above normal. This matched the old accounts almost too perfectly. But instead of accelerating excavation, the discovery became another reason not to open the tomb. Officials cited preservation. Critics suspected fear. The region has since been strategically planted with trees. Satellite images show vegetation lined up in grid-like patterns, obscuring the geometric shapes beneath. When challenged, authorities point to erosion control and reforestation programs. But in many areas, locals are forbidden from digging, building, or even photographing certain mounds. These aren't forgotten ruins. They are being actively hidden. Hausdorff's expedition never returned. His photos, though published, were downplayed. His claims were ridiculed. But the photos don't lie. They show symmetry, alignment, and a kind of architectural discipline that doesn't match the modest explanations given. No one questions whether the pyramids exist. The question is why they aren't studied. Theories range from cautious respect for the dead to fears of what might be uncovered. Some believe the structures are far older than the Han dynasty reused, or built atop even older foundations. Others suggest that certain discoveries might reveal technological or astronomical knowledge far ahead of their time, reshaping how we view early civilizations. But these are just theories, because excavation has never been allowed. So the pyramids remain, dozens of them, hidden in plain sight, dressed in soil and trees, mapped by satellites, but fenced off from hands and tools. No signs, no monuments. Just guarded earth that rises too evenly and sits too quietly. There's a strange kind of stillness surrounding these hills, as if even time has agreed not to disturb them. Farmers till the soil near the edges, but never ask what lies beneath. Locals grow up with the mounds in view, but over the years, they've learned not to wonder out loud. It's not fear, it's familiarity with a boundary that was never formally declared, only understood. The message isn't written on signs, it's written in absentia. And that kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It isn't that no one wants to know, it's that someone has decided we shouldn't. And until that changes, the truth about China's buried pyramids will stay where it is, under grass, under orders, and under centuries of calculated forgetting. The LiDAR jungle city in Honduras. The discovery didn't begin with a shovel in the dirt, it began in the air. In 2012, a team of scientists flew a small aircraft over the dense rainforest of eastern Honduras, carrying LiDAR equipment that could see through the jungle canopy. Below them was one of the last unexplored stretches of rainforest in the Americas, a place few had entered and fewer had returned from. What the sensors revealed beneath the trees shocked everyone. A vast network of structures, plazas, canals, and pyramids, an entire city swallowed by the jungle, unknown to modern archaeology. It had no name, at least none officially recognized. Some whispered it might be the fabled Ciudad Blanquez white city spoken of in both indigenous legend and Spanish colonial accounts. But others warned against romanticizing it. This wasn't just one lost city. The LiDAR scans suggested a whole civilization, organized and engineered, hiding in plain sight under centuries of vines and rot. What was once speculation had turned into data miles of mapped infrastructure that couldn't be denied. The announcement sparked immediate excitement in the scientific world. News outlets ran dramatic headlines. Expeditions were proposed, documentaries were pitched, and the public imagination lit up with visions of Indiana Jones-style discoveries. But then, something shifted. The details slowed. The press coverage went quiet. Teams that had hoped to begin excavation faced unusual resistance, not just from the environment, but from bureaucracy. Permits stalled. Local institutions grew cautious. And warnings began to circulate that stepping too far into this discovery could cause more trouble than progress. On paper, the official stance was protection. The Honduran government emphasized the need to preserve the site from looters, from ecological damage, and sensationalism. It sounded reasonable. But researchers close to the project began to note an odd pattern. Certain documents became harder to access. The exact coordinates of the find were never published. When a follow-up team did reach the ground in 2015, what they found only deepened the mystery stone sculptures with snarling animal faces, mounds arranged with mathematical precision, and artifacts that didn't quite match known Mesoamerican cultures. They were forced to leave almost as soon as they arrived. Disease swept through the camp, with many team members falling ill from a rare parasite carried by local sandflies. Rumours took hold that the sickness was a curse, a warning. Superstition aside, what mattered was that excavation ceased. No large-scale dig has occurred since. The jungle was left to close its grip once again. Those who've seen the data say this wasn't a small outpost or village. It was a metropolis. Some estimates suggest it may have housed tens of thousands of people, complete with an agricultural system and sophisticated urban planning. But to confirm that, someone would need to go back in, to dig, to unearth what lies beneath the moss and mud. And that's not happening, at least not openly. There's speculation that the delay isn't about preservation at all. Some believe the site contains evidence that could force a rewrite of Central American history, evidence that an advanced and undocumented culture flourished here, parallel to or even predating the Maya. Others suggest the city might contain artifacts, not yet understood technologies, or symbols that don't fit into the established record. Still, others point to corporate and governmental interests that fear the international attention would bring scrutiny to land deals, mining claims, or development projects nearby. Meanwhile, the jungle keeps its secrets. LiDAR maps still circulate in hushed, circles blurry, half-redacted images passed between researchers, each showing clean, angular structures in a place where no such thing was supposed to exist. The few artifacts recovered were quietly handed over to Honduran institutions. Most have never been displayed. No one knows exactly where they are now. The site is real, the data is real, but access is gone. What began as a groundbreaking discovery now lingers in limbo, held back by a tangle of environmental policy, national interest, academic rivalry, and perhaps something deeper. A city was founded, a civilization was touched. But then the story stopped mid-sentence, mid-dig, as if someone decided that the world had already seen too much. Whatever lies beneath that jungle canopy remains there, not because it can't be uncovered, but because for reasons left unexplained, it won't be. The Egyptian Hall of Records. They were scanning for erosion, not secrets. That's what the team said when they first passed radar equipment over the limestone base of the Sphinx. The goal was preservation, understanding how deep the cracks ran, how far the damage had crept after centuries of sand and wind. But the machines showed something else. Beneath the front paws of the monument, right where no one had expected it, was a hollow space. Not a natural void, not a random pocket. A chamber, rectangular and sharply defined. That was when everything started to slow down. The discovery was confirmed more than once. John Anthony West brought in seismic experts. Their readings mirrored the first. Anomalies beneath the monument, consistent with man-made rooms. Rumours spread fast. Could this be the long-rumoured Hall of Records? The legendary library said to contain the wisdom of a lost civilization? West and others pushed for access, proposing small, non-invasive drills to verify the chamber's structure. The requests went nowhere. No denial, no approval, just a stall that became a wall. At the time, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities was under the watch of Zahi Hawass, a figure both revered and criticized in archaeological circles. He dismissed the idea outright, calling it a fantasy spun from fringe theories. But the data hadn't come from mystics. It had come from geophysicists, engineers, scientists. Still, their findings were quietly moved out of view, boxed in by layers of bureaucratic concern, risk to the structure, preservation priorities, lack of necessity. What couldn't be explained was why the site, once so open to global research, suddenly became so closely guarded. Researchers who had previously worked in the area found access revoked. Some said their permits were delayed indefinitely, others simply weren't called back. And around the base of the Sphinx, new restrictions appeared, not loudly, not publicly, but quietly enough to change everything. Even scholars who once had open access to the Giza Plateau began choosing their words more carefully. Invitations to conferences were withdrawn. Funding dried up. Careers stalled in quiet, uncomfortable ways. It wasn't an overt crackdown, it was the kind of slow silencing that doesn't leave fingerprints. And in academic circles, that can be even more effective than censorship. The deeper mystery isn't just the chamber, it's the intensity with which it's been left alone. Historical records describe vaults of ancient texts, celestial maps, and records carved in stone and metal, supposedly buried by an older race whose knowledge predated dynastic Egypt. To mainstream archaeology, these accounts are metaphor, myth, or mistake. But if the chamber were truly empty, just a hollow space in the bedrock, why such caution? There were strange reports in the years that followed. Locals claimed they'd seen nighttime equipment hauled across the Giza Plateau, escorted under the cover of darkness. A few international researchers alleged that small-scale digs had been conducted without publicity. But nothing concrete ever surfaced, just second-hand sightings, missing paperwork, and projects that started strong and ended without explanation. What's left is an absence that feels too carefully maintained. No drills, no cameras, no curiosity, at least not where it counts. Even as technology advanced, offering less invasive ways to explore subterranean features, the silence around the chamber deepened. Preservation remained the shield, but beneath it, something else settled in. A refusal not based on fragility, but on what might be disturbed. Casey's prophecy, once laughed off by academics, mentioned this exact spot. He named the Sphinx. He described a room below it that held a forgotten history records of a time before the flood, before kings, before memory. For decades, it was easy to ignore. But then a cavity showed up, exactly where he said it would be. And from that moment on, the ground was no longer just stone, it was a question no one was allowed to answer. People visit the Sphinx every day. They pose for photos, trace their fingers along ancient rock, and listen to guides speak of pharaohs and dynasties. None of them realize that just meters below their feet, beneath centuries of carved silence, may lie something older than Egypt itself. And yet no one is digging. Not because it's impossible, not because it's unsafe, but somewhere behind closed doors, a decision has already been made. The Dropa stones of China. They were found high in the Bayan Mountains of China, in a cave so remote it wasn't marked on standard maps. The story goes back to the 1930s, when an expedition led by Chinese archaeologist Chi Pu Te stumbled upon a series of burial sites unlike anything they had ever seen. The skeletons were small, frail, with abnormally large skulls bodies that didn't match any known ethnic group in the region. But it wasn't the bones that drew the most attention. It was what was lying next to them. Hundreds of thin stone discs, each about 9 inches wide, carved with tiny, almost microscopic symbols spiraling from the center outward. At first glance, they looked like old phonograph records, weathered, covered in dust and impossibly ancient. The symbols didn't match Chinese writing. They didn't match anything. They were carved so finely into the stone that deciphering them seemed impossible with the tools available at the time. The stones were packed up, labelled, and quietly moved into university storage. For years, they sat ignored, dismissed as relics with no real significance. But that changed when word of them began leaking beyond academic circles. Russian researchers in the early 1960s reportedly gained access to a few of the discs and tried to analyze the material. According to later reports, they discovered the stones contained unusually high levels of cobalt and other metals not typically found in that kind of rock. Even stranger was their alleged conclusion that the discs had properties suggesting they might once have been electrically active, as if part of a machine. the idea was laughed off in the West. No reputable journal would touch it, but by then, the Dropa stones, as they came to be called, had taken on a life of their own. A man named Tsum Nuyal, allegedly affiliated with the Beijing Academy for Ancient Studies, claimed to have translated the carvings. According to him, the discs told the story of an extraterrestrial crash landing that occurred thousands of years ago. The survivors, small and fragile, were unable to leave and were eventually hunted by the local tribes. Some researchers immediately pointed out that Tsum Nui's name didn't appear in any academic registry. Others said the academy he worked for didn't exist, but no one could explain away the stones themselves. They were real. People had seen them, and some claimed to have held them. And yet, by the late 1970s, the physical discs began disappearing. Museums that once housed them could no longer locate them. Researchers who inquired about them received vague responses or were told no such objects had ever been catalogued. Even photographs that once circulated in print became harder to track down. Some believe they were removed on purpose either because they were fraudulent or because they weren't. The region itself, meanwhile, became more difficult to access. Travel restrictions tightened. New excavations were discouraged. The caves where the bones and stones had reportedly been found were never fully mapped. The entire chain of discovery began to feel like a vanishing trailone that started in solid rock and ended in disappearing archives. People still debate whether the Dropa stones ever existed. The lack of peer-reviewed documentation makes them easy to dismiss. But their story has endured not because of what was proven, but because of how fiercely it was buried. Every attempt to verify the details meets a wall. Researchers are discredited, publications disappear, and no official institution will acknowledge even the possibility. There's a reason this mystery hasn't gone away. The stones weren't just relics, they were evidence of something that didn't fit, a physical contradiction. Whether the story of their origin is true or not, the reaction they provoked says something on its own. They were catalogued, studied, tested, and then erased. Not by time, but by intention. If the Dropa stones were a hoax, why has no one ever come forward to explain how it was done? If they were real, why were they silenced so completely? The answers aren't buried in the cave where they were found. They're buried in the decisions made afterward, in the documents that vanished, in the names that no longer appear in university records, and in the silence that deepened with every year the stones remained unseen.